Słyszę cięższy wentylator.
Okay, welcome everybody. That's a pretty abject way to open a live stream, I realize. I'm James, that's Joel, and you're at the Listening with the Pandemic, as you may have worked out. This is the final of 3 sessions that accompany a resource we've been developing and just launched with Unsound. It's called Machine Listening, a Curriculum, and we'll explain a little more about that in a second. For those of you, who weren't at either of the previous sessions, the previous fantastic sessions, I should say. But before I get to that, I just want to begin by acknowledging country. Um, which is an important practice here in Australia and elsewhere that perhaps some viewers and listeners won't be familiar with. But just to say that I'm speaking currently from the traditional lands of the Bidjigal people, and I want to pay respects to elders past, present, emerging, and acknowledge any Indigenous people who may be present today. I also want to do this, and we've been doing this every in each of these sessions. Situate machine listening from the outset in relation to a conversation about place, country, data colonialism, and in relation to long-standing stories about the relationship between science, technology, and imperialism, and the logics of kind of placelessness and a certain kind of God's view objectivity and that sort of is related to stories about terra nullius and so on. So, that's just to say welcome and thank you for coming, and to encourage everybody to say where you're where you're listening in from as well. We want to make sort of extensive use of this chat window on the right here. So say where you are, give us a shout, and just say hello.
Hi, everyone. As James mentioned, my name is Joel Stern, part of an organisation called Liquid Architecture, and been working with James, also our co-curator Sean Dockray, who you're going to be hearing from in a moment, developing this project, Machine Listening, a curriculum, for some time now. Very honoured to be here at Unsound, although when I say here, I should acknowledge where I am, which is on Wurundjeri land, Aboriginal land, over which sovereignty has never been ceded, and that land is in the northern suburbs of the city that most of you will know as Melbourne in Australia. And that's where I've been for the last 2 nights, but in a very real way, I feel like I've been with an international community of artists and thinkers, with an audience. There's about 100 people on the Zoom now, and there have been hundreds in the previous sessions, people watching on YouTube and Facebook as well. And it's been an amazing way to launch this program, share these ideas, and again, to encourage you to use the chat window to reach out, to let us know what you're thinking about the program, questions, ideas that you have, reflections. But of course, at the outset now, just to say hello to us and to everyone else who's tuning in, and let us know where you are. That would be fantastic. And while you do that, James and I will, I think, set up the framework a little bit for you now, and say something about why machine listening, what is machine listening, and what we hope to do in this session.
Yeah, we've been doing this every night. And I'm aware that one of the things that's been really nice about this is having a kind of a continuity of audience. I can see familiar names, people I've never met, popping up in the window there, and it's a real pleasure. It's sincerely, it's exciting to have had this continuous engagement. But nevertheless, there are new people, and there'll be people who are watching this for the first time in the live stream. So on the stream. So just to say, this project is about machine listening, and we don't necessarily have a kind of a fully formed understanding of what machine listening is at the outset, right? That's one of the reasons why it's a curriculum. We want to learn together with people about what this object might be. But I think people do have a kind of an orientation, a bit of an understanding about what machine listening is. People have smart speakers and smart assistants. They're in places, they engage with, call centers on the phone that can, automatically recognize speech. And they're increasingly aware that we live in an environment of networked, network microphones and network listening. And when we say, machine listening, we mean all of those kind of the histories of those machines, but specifically we're thinking about the kind of algorithmic or AI-led iterations of those technologies, forms of listening that are connected to big data and to an emerging field of technoscience that uses this term machine listening amongst many other synonyms, right? So it's not just it's not a settled field. In science, in the scientific kind of literature, you'll see textbooks that refer to audio event detection on the front page, or audio scene analysis, computational audition, computational listening. And so one of the things we want to do is join this practice of naming the object, and in so naming it, take some of the power away from the scientists and say this is a political object too. This is a social and political object, machine listening, like computer vision or facial recognition, that deserves a similar kind of attention. And we want to sort of begin producing or joining people who have also begun producing machine listening as an object. And we think that's sort of where we're beginning here.
But I mean, there's also, we say it's a political and a social object. And I mean, I think we want to stress as well that there's a sort of poetics and an aesthetics of machine listening that we want to explore too. And that's why, experimental music, sonic art organizations like Liquid Architecture and Unsound Festival, both grounded in those histories, are a great place to be launching this curriculum and sort of connecting with communities that have already thought so deeply about questions of listening, whether it's through the prism of sound art and experimental music, or otherwise have sort of their thinking, is filtered through the prism of so many, experimental listening practices. And we're also aware that this is a very, often technologically literate kind of community too. So we use devices, we think about listening. And so I think, artists, musicians, many of whom are already doing groundbreaking work in this area, are so well placed to kind of, let's say, form a machine listening counterculture. If that's not too over the top a claim to make, I think that's what we're trying to do here. And maybe James, if you want to bring up the website at this point, and we can just make it explicit, as this is the final session, how these sessions that we've been staging here at Unsound Festival, each of them against the coming world of listening machines, lessons in how not to be heard, and the one that we're in now, listening with the pandemic, they correspond to topics that you can see here on the curriculum website, and those topics are expanded upon in various ways, in the form of a kind of hypertextual essay that is filled with references or audio clips, and ideas that are kind of modular and that we want to continue to grow. And each of those topics also has experiments associated with them, experiments which might be pedagogical or task-oriented, but also in some cases are artworks developed for the program, and many of the performances and presentations that we've seen over the last couple of days will find their way into the experiments section of the curriculum website. So what we're looking at here is the listening with the pandemic section of the curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about this. I mean, I suppose one way to begin would be just to say that we kind of took our lead from Unsound. So I don't know, people have noticed, but this year's Unsound is called Unsound Intermission, and the specific way in which this whole program is taking place, begins with the pandemic context, right? In a way, like everything that we've done so far in Zoom online, has been mediated by the pandemic. This would have taken place, in real life, in some form. Of course, we're in real life now, but if it hadn't been for the pandemic. So in some ways, we've been listening with the pandemic the whole time. But Unsound's provocation was to say, well, this is, in the pandemic, in a sense, produces an intermission, a kind of a break in proceedings. The curtain, falls. It's a pause, and we wanted to say, well, from the perspective of machine listening, in what ways is the pandemic an intermission? Because we wanted to, we have the feeling that maybe it's also an opportunity from the perspective of the corporations that are moving in increasingly to the health sector, into edutech and so on, that this is a kind of, to use the language of kind of Naomi Klein, a sort of a shot to the system that can bring into, provides an opportunity to do the things that they had always wanted to do. So we've been thinking a little bit with that idea of the intermission, and you'll see in the essay there's a number of other kind of terms like touchlessness, thoughtlessness, wakewordlessness that we've been playing around, and maybe they'll sit in the background in some of the presentations today.
I mean, we only need to look at the fact that what Jeff Bezos has made $80 billion since the pandemic started to realize it's an acceleration of certain pathologies, certain power structures, and certain tendencies. But maybe that's setting things up in rather too dogmatic fashion for what we're about to go into.
Yeah, so so the topic today is the pandemic and how that might invite us to think about machine listening differently. And we're sort of taking a slightly different approach, format-wise, to the previous sessions as well. We're sort of shifting gears. Partly this is just because it's a Sunday and, people need a little bit of a change of pace. So we're going to go for a slightly more kind of conversational and fluid style. But it's also, a matter of, the foregrounding the pandemic, which has kind of always been there. And as I was saying, if you look at Lauren Lee McCarthy's performance of I Heard Talking is Dangerous from the first night, or DeForest Brown Jr.'s performance last night from his hotel room, like watching CNN from this kind of strange kind of aesthetic of quarantine. The pandemic has been there the whole time, but by foregrounding it this evening, we wanted to kind of, bring ourselves into the present. And we've kind of invited an amazing roster of speakers to help us do that, and to we've invited each of them to kind of think with to say something about their own work. I mean, I can't be the only one whose work has been pandemicified, right? I think that's the case for many of us who can't help but think with the pandemic now, or listen with the pandemic. And for many of the people who are speaking tonight, we've asked them to kind of speak about their own work, but as it's kind of refracted through the present context, which is kind of live and ongoing, as we're all extremely well aware. So maybe if we could just invite the panelists to turn their cameras on briefly, just to say hello, give everybody a bit of a wave. We've got Shannon Mattern, Sean Dockray, Jasmine Milner, Mark Andrejevic, Thao Phan, Vladan Joler, and Andrew Brooks. It's an amazing lineup. Thanks, everybody. And actually, I mean, before we get on with it, we'll get on with it in a second. Just to say as well that Shannon sort of deserves a special mention in a way, because it was an essay of hers that we'll put into the chat window in a second, called Urban Auscultation. It was published in Pace's journal, that partly inspired our thinking for the session, because she specifically reads the pandemic in relation to machine listening there, and she in doing so, she puts machine listening into conversation with a broader history of auscultation, it's called, or diagnostic listening. And there's one point in that essay where she asks, when the sounds of the pandemic recede, how will our hearing be changed? When the sounds of the pandemic recede, how will our hearing be changed? And that question kind of stuck with us. And we, you
So,
know,
I mean, we talked about maybe at that point, sort of, you know, I mean, this was the question that informed this session. It's a question that informed many of our subsequent interactions with the guests and sort of conversations with the guests that are speaking tonight. And, you know, we thought we would also offer that question out to you, the audience watching and listening in tonight, to kind of let us know, you know, how you think our hearing will be changed when the sounds of the pandemic recede, acknowledging that there isn't one pandemic. It's a kind of, there are irreducibly different experiences of the pandemic as there are of hearing. It's not sort of generalizable. So we kind of want to open that up and invite responses there. And I also think that question, when the sounds of the pandemic recede, how will our hearing be changed, is a kind of perfect introduction to Sean Dockray's work, Diagnostic Ear, which he's going to present for
listening
us
to
now.
the diagnostic ear.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Joel and James. I want to just do a few thank yous to begin, especially to Joel and James for inviting me to do this in particular on this day. I want to thank Lauren, Debris, and Alisa, and everyone at Liquid Architecture, really. I want to thank everyone who's been coming over the last few nights, well, nights for us, whatever the time of day is, especially people in America, because it is early there. And especially want to thank everyone who's presented. Like, my God, I've learned so much and just gotten so much out of everyone's presentations. It's been sort of said a few times that like in normal times, we'd all sort of be in the same room together. And that's true. But instead, we sort of find ourselves in what's more or less 200 different rooms. And you know, I'm in one of them. I'm alone in my room here. And it's just, I just found it so powerful, like at certain points, just how even being alone in my room, the sort of like emotion and affect still managed to circulate through Zoom of all things. From like the euphoria sort of at the end of last night in DeForest's presentation to this kind of like habitual nervous jitter that sort of occupies my body and is so kind of incompatible with, you know, it's actually a quite welcoming and familiar place. So I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. For the next 20 minutes or so, or a little less, I'm going to be taking us on a tour through a data set. There's not a doorway or an entrance to this tour, so let's start chronologically at the beginning. In the waning hours of March 18th of this year, a 6'3" man, 44 years old, in America gives his web browser permission to access his microphone. Every indication is that he feels quite well. His temperature is 36.5 degrees Celsius. The website which has requested this permission prompts him to cough 3 times. He complies, and thus begins the Corona Voice Detect dataset. The dataset's parentage is complex. It's the offspring of an Israeli inventor, a New York-based startup that makes synthetic call center assistants based on artificial intelligence, and a team at Carnegie Mellon University specializing in voice forensics. The inventor is especially promiscuous. His biography is basically a running count of all of his patents, which includes, among hundreds of others, starting a simulation from a real situation. And he imagines application in sporting events and military battlefields. Anyway, their idea is to collect a data set of voice samples, including coughs, and to build a program that could identify coronavirus infections from the sound that we make. This program would hear COVID days before symptoms appear. In many ways, I'm persuaded by the promise of this project. A test from my own home or wherever I happen to be sounds really good. A test that doesn't violate my nasal cavity. A test that protects healthcare workers. A test that gets people who are systematically excluded from testing. And when you listen to the data set, you sometimes hear people breaking the rules.
Okay, I'm here and I'm fine. Okay, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
You hear them pushing back on the
I.
prompts.
Okay,
Hey,
just
homies, what's
checking.
up? Hey, homies, what's up?
Not as defiance, but to express a desire for something.
Hello, hello. I'm trying to understand if I have COVID-19. Hello.
It's
hello,
as if
hello.
recording one's
Do
cough
I have COVID-19?
is a civic duty, a call to action. Help us stop COVID-19.
Submitting my voice recording for the Corona Voice AI technology that you guys are developing. I hope this helps you in finding the cure and my data sample helps you. Thank you.
It's the promise of a quick technological fix that demands very little sacrifice, at least in terms of effort or conscious thought. But even still, it's remarkable how willing people have been to hand over their biometric data without limitation to the startup Voca AI, which built the website. Corona Voice Detect is not the only such project. The COVID-19 Sounds app, COVID-19 detection by coffin voice analysis, the city of Mumbai, CAS, another project, which means coffin Sanskrit, is a project by a startup in India. Vocalis in partnership with Neurolex, which was just bought by Sonda Health. And then another project by Vocalis in partnership with the Israeli Ministry of Defense. These are just a few of them. COVID testing is a $44 billion market. And unsurprisingly, COVID is the nail for 1,000 machine learning hammers. Projects based on the theory that machines can listen to vocal biomarkers to detect psychosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, depression, among other conditions, have been adapted to COVID. For example, a 2008 voice analytics program for diagnosing tuberculosis from a group of engineering students in Mumbai was retuned to detect COVID. Lawrence Abu Hamdan, who you might have seen last night, connected this recently in a conversation to the history of the stethoscope, or any practice of auscultation, of listening directly to the body rather than to the words of the patient. Etienne Jules Murray anticipates the surrealist method of automatic writing when his instruments, for instance, translate the inner life of the body into graphic traces. The subject is not to be trusted or is not up to the task of accounting for themselves. Even if disingenuous, David Applebaum wrote in his book on voice, however, the cough vocalically expresses the body, that is the habitat, and perhaps a trace of its sometimes inhabitant, the person. The cough tells its own story. It gives us away. Not just in the way that the cough from behind a curtain betrays the one who's hiding, but, and this is Applebaum again, to the oscilloscope, the cough is as reliable a mark of individuality as any voice print. The cough, and the diagnostic ear that now listens to it, is situated in a wider political economic context of privatized care, insurance, pharmaceuticals, and fitness, as well as weakened labor, hyper-individualized marketing, restricted movement, restrictions on protest. These things have been going on for a long time, but omnivorous, rapacious corporate surveillance accelerates, retunes, and amplifies their effect. In George Orwell's novel 1984, the telescreen is the vehicle for universal surveillance. It's the eye through which Big Brother watches. But it's a two-way device. Every morning, Winston awakes to a motivational disciplinary exercise regime, which reminds me, frankly, of a Zoom session. And this regime sends him into a coughing fit. One morning, he sits down for work and sighs audibly. He's immediately conscious of the message that this might send because of the telescreen's microphone. Orwell calls it a never-sleeping ear, much like Amazon's Alexa, which, despite having a wake word, is always listening. The telescreen's microphone is sensitive enough to pick up not only nervous breathing, but also a heartbeat, which incidentally, I quote, can give away your identity like a fingerprint. But that is from Cardio ID, a startup that wants to integrate ECG biometrics into steering wheels, not 1984, by the way. So because 1984 is so preoccupied with liberal values of individuality and privacy, the surveillance is always revealing one's identity, location, or thoughts. A rapid heartbeat gives away an illicit plan. Winston's coughs, however, are superfluous. They're of no real value to Big Brother. This fits with the place of the cough in philosophy, which is to say that it has no place. Aristotle's cough does not rise to the level of voice because it has no meaning. It's unintentional. But often coughs do have a meaning. Stephen Connor posits a thesaurus of coughing, and Vladan Joler identifies the semiotics of coughing. For example, when I'm getting ready to speak, or when I want to make clear room in the conversation to speak, to delay while I think, as an ironic rejoinder, to let you know that I'm here, to relieve the tension building in a silence. In spite of all this meaning and signification, the cough is detritus, just a symptom. Applebaum asks, the coughs of a man's life may be as numbered as his days and words, but are they similarly recorded? Now and tomorrow, yes. But in 1948, no. George Orwell didn't anticipate the recording of coughs. He didn't anticipate many things. In fact, in a review, Isaac Asimov wrote that if 1984 is to be considered science fiction at all, then it is, quote, very bad science fiction. Among the book's many faults, Asimov writes that Orwell was unable to conceive of computers or robots, or he would have placed everyone under non-human surveillance. But Asimov himself was wrong here, because where he saw the possibility, he couldn't see the political will. And here we are. Our devices watch and listen to us, feeding data into aggregated, complex, cross-correlated databases that train neural networks to identify, classify, recommend, and predict. 1984 was set 36 years into the future from 1948. And if we jump ahead another 36 years to 2020, we might imagine an alternative story that Orwell might have written, with the cough at the center. You see, George Orwell had been diagnosed with chronic tuberculosis as he worked on 1984. He received some of the standard treatments of the day. They collapsed his lung and paralyzed his diaphragm. He spent time in a sanitarium. And while his condition slowly deteriorated, news came from America of an experimental treatment. It hadn't passed a formal trial, but had been rushed to market as a miracle drug, streptomycin. Only the UK couldn't get it, or couldn't get very much, and Orwell is deemed too old at 44 years of age to qualify for it. And even if he hadn't been too old, None of the drug was distributed to Scotland anyway. And even if all that weren't a problem, there was panic buying and black markets, which we might recognize today in the situation around hydroxychloroquine. So he mobilized his social and political connections, using his liquidity in America to buy and import streptomycin. George Orwell became the first person in Scotland to get to try it. This is already the outline of a story. Torturous treatments, international finance, the politics of medication along lines of class and race. And it becomes horrific. After taking the drug, Orwell awakens each morning with his lips sealed from the dried blood from the blisters in his throat. His fingernails and toenails fall out. His hair falls out too in black patches and grows back white. Orwell might have written about how capitalism accelerates the disease. During the Industrial Revolution, millions migrated from the countryside into growing industrial cities. Tuberculosis thrived there, taking the lives of 1 out of every 3 people. If we try to listen to the industrial city, it sounds something like this. But aren't insecure workers in this position today? With bosses and landlords that give no relief without getting it first, workers are compelled to face the virus with the knowledge that others might be victim or executioner. Martin O'Brien, an artist with cystic fibrosis, describes in a very recent paper the zombie time that now characterizes our world, a world in which we are unable to be together. In the alternative story, which turns out to be our present, Orwell could have written about Downing Street's scientific advisors who fear that people might intentionally seek to contract coronavirus and that a black market in fake test results would emerge if employers allowed workers to return only when they had a positive antibody test. Are they afraid workers will be forever contagious and therefore absent? A never-ending wildcat sick day? Or is the problem rather that workers without job and wage security will bring the virus to work rather than risk personal financial ruin? To circumvent this black market for fake test results, a corporation, maybe Voca AI, offers a new type of testing. All you have to do is cough, and you and your employer get the verified results instantly. But a new black market develops. This one is for a device with a small knob, a speaker, and a line output. It generates fake coughs that will be diagnosed with a certain specific probability of COVID. If you turn the dial down, the cough is confidently clear of the virus. When the knob is turned in the opposite direction, a very sick cough is played. An arms race ensues, with no clear conclusion. But all along, it's the ones with the technological upper hand who get the diagnosis they want. One day, someone from the synthetic call center division of Voca AI hears about the fake coughs. Could we do that, they wonder? The automated agents, whose voice was already quite realistic in texture and prosody, was still missing something. The lisps, the sighs, the rasp, the sniffle, the cough. Not long after, every phone conversation with an insurance representative or about benefits, because there were a lot of unemployed people making a lot of phone calls, was interrupted by at least one fake cough. In 1948, 2 36-year leaps back from today, Orwell wrote about one of his doctors. He wrote, "There were many beds past which he walked day after day, sometimes followed by imploring cries. On the other hand, if you had some disease with which the students wanted to familiarize themselves, you got plenty of attention of a kind. I myself, with an exceptionally fine specimen of a bronchial rattle, sometimes had as many as a dozen students queuing up to listen to my chest. It was a very queer feeling. Queer, I mean, because of their intense interest in learning their jobs, together with a seeming lack of perception that the patients were human beings. In 2020, it's maybe not doctors and their interns and their specimen patients, but inventors and their programmers and their training data. For them, the cough is valuable, but only in aggregate. When the faulty data is thrown out, when the features have been extracted, when the accuracy scores get above 80%. In the early 20th century, many writers died of tuberculosis. Franz Kafka, Anton Chekhov, Catherine Mansfield. And like Downing Street's paranoid fantasy of fake COVID tests, people with TB would deny having it for fear of being ostracized and isolated. Kafka and Chekhov lied to their families. Chekhov wrote, "I feel as though I'm in prison and full of rage." Terrible rage. For Mansfield, this isolation is death to me. A cough in public would attract disapproving looks, at least. A cough, air escaping as through a gash, Stephen Connor, can be so meaningful, but its meaning ultimately comes from the world that it escapes into. This data set, thousands of coughs from people isolated from one another by distance and emergency restrictions, in a political climate that desperately wants to automatically separate the healthy from the sick so that the economy resumes its thoughtless growth and the sick never appear in the first place. If we listen to the coughs, they tell us not so much about the symptoms, but about the structure that is learning to diagnose them and our place in it. Catherine Mansfield wrote a poem called Malade, while in isolation. I just want to read it to conclude this tour. The man in the room next to mine has got the same complaint as I. When I wake in the night and hear him turning, then he coughs, and I cough. And he coughs again. This goes on for a long time. Until I feel like we are two roosters calling to each other at a false dawn from faraway hidden farms.
That was absolutely incredible. Sean, can you just pop your camera back on for a second? Just acknowledge the applause, the sort of the virtual applause that's coming in from the chat. That was just so great.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I mean, virtuosic, and we'd like to invite you to come back later at the end and sort of just be present for any questions and comments and discussion that comes out of that
absolutely.
work. And I'm sure there will be because it's so incredibly rich. Okay, thanks so much, Sean. And with that, I'm going to invite Yeshimabet Milner to switch her camera on. There aren't that many acts that could follow Sean's work there, but Yeshi is one of them. She's the founder and executive director. Yeshi, are you there?
Hello.
There you are. Hello. So she's the founder and executive director of Data for Black Lives, which we'll say something about in a moment. Her biography says that she's worked since she was 17 behind the scenes as a movement builder, technologist, and data scientist on a number of campaigns. And her kind of honors and accolades are very, very many, and I'll leave that to the sort of the chat window to enumerate properly. But Yeshi, it's just such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much, and especially because you're recently arrived in Paris, and I know that you've made a big effort to be here with us. So I just wanted to begin by saying, a sincere thank you, and we really appreciate it.
thank you so much for having me and for your flexibility, and to Joel and Sean and everyone for organizing this conversation. I think, you know, Sean, your performance just now in your talk was wonderful. I found myself feeling this sense of discomfort every time I heard those coughs. And when we first saw the first part of it in the beginning of this, I thought a lot about how our work at Data for Black Lives, a lot of it is humanizing the threat, right? So how do we take, data sets that represent real people, lives, death, profound loss of human life, right? Bigger than anything that we'll probably ever see again in our generation. And how do we actually, in a world that has been so abstracted and we're so distanced away from what, researchers and scholars call the gore capitalism of the situations that we're witnessing right now, hearing those coughs, so visceral and so profound. And I think situating us where we're at now. So thank you for that. As James, as you said, my name is Yeshi. I'm founder and ED of Data for Black Lives. And I know this is the first of many things, hopefully, that D4BL myself will be doing with liquid architecture. But I can talk a bit about who we are, what we do, right? What is Data for Black Lives? That would be amazing, yeah. Data for Black Lives. We're a movement of over 10,000 scientists and activists working to make data a tool for social change instead of a weapon of political oppression. We currently are based in the US, but we have hubs in 6 cities across the US, including in Toronto, and we're building out our hub program this year to span internationally. Our work is in the area of research, policy and advocacy, and most importantly, in movement building, right? I'll talk a little bit about how I started Data for Black Lives, but really in a nutshell, I know that in order for us to change and abolish and dismantle racist algorithms, the weaponization of data, we can't just do it by changing out training data sets, right? We believe that we have to change the context, we have to change who's at the table, we have to change the cast of characters of who's involved in the development of these technologies, because that's who decides how it's being used, right? And we're seeing this right now in COVID-19, where something like a cough app could be useful to helping vulnerable populations, poor people who do not have access to COVID-19 testing, to actually understand if they have COVID. But again, in the context of a global police state, right? Racial capitalism, neoliberalism, and again, a profound loss of human life, those technologies are being weaponized, right? In this present context, but also historically. Earlier, Joel, you talked about our work being pandemic-fied, and I was thinking about that earlier, and also just, I'm here in Paris right now, officially on a sabbatical that I had planned out since last year, because even though we had not known that COVID was gonna happen, we had no idea that the work that we had been involved in for years around racial justice would become a worldwide uprising and a worldwide movement moment. We had already stepped in this place of scaling out Data for Black Lives. And, while Data for Black Lives, started only 3.5 years ago, it launched with a conference at the MIT Media Lab. It actually comes out of my work, my experiences of building in a crisis, right? The very first time I ever collected data was as a high school student. It was after some young people that I went to elementary school and middle school had actually organized a peaceful protest in response to a student being put in a chokehold by a vice principal. And, right now, instead of those young people being recognized for standing up and for having their voices heard, the school district, the school, everyone, they sent in police cars, SWAT teams. I'll never forget being at home and watching on CNN national news in the US, students riot at Miami Senior High School. I knew that it wasn't a riot, but I also knew then that unless we found other channels of getting our voices heard, our lives would continue to be under assault. And I joined an organization called Power Youth Center for Social Change, and we hit the ground running, collecting surveys, asking 600 young people about their experiences with police brutality, state-sanctioned violence, arrests, and suspensions in schools. And we actually turned those findings into a comic book. And I returned to Miami after college to do more organizing work around Black infant mortality. That was also the summer that George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin's murderer, was acquitted from all charges, similarly to how more recently Breonna Taylor's murderers were also acquitted. And we had actually mobilized to the state capitol and occupied the state capitol for 30 days. But at that moment, 4 years earlier, even though it took us years for restorative justice, the policies that we were pushing for to replace what we were seeing in our schools, the violence, folks all over the country, all over the US used our comic book and in cities like Denver and New Orleans and Oakland. And I think from then, I knew the power of data, right? Alone, we could be ignored, but there's power in a number. And how could data, to kind of go with the theme of this, be a megaphone, right? For people who are seen, but not heard, right? For people whose voices are traditionally marginalized and disenfranchised. And I mean, I can go into other examples of things that I've done. How do we use data? How do we use data as protest? But also, how do we do it in this moment, in a crisis, in a time where we're actually being called to lean in and to build in a different kind of way? I'll stop there because, James, I know you have questions.
Well, no, that's that segues perfectly because, it's hearing. I have a tendency to the dystopic, right? And so when
Yes.
I think about, big data and I think, let's abolish it. And that's a central claim, for Data for Black Lives. But you spoke so positively about the power of data as evidence then. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit about what your organization, what you and your organization mean by abolish big data as a kind of a political claim that's obviously related to other claims around, prison abolition and so on at the moment.
Yes, definitely. Abolish big data is a call to action that I actually put forth when we first started D4BL. I was presenting at a congressional hearing at the United States Capitol and talking about the uses of algorithms with some of my amazing colleagues, Joan Donovan from Data and Society and some other folks. And, I put out in front of folks in Congress, I said, staffers, legislative folks, I said, what would it look like for us to abolish credit scores? At least in the US, credit scoring, with a 3-digit number, people are being denied homes, hardworking families, right? People are being denied unemployment. It's a social and digital artifact that it's extending the shelf life of racist policies of the past. And I said, you know what? I can't really stop at abolishing credit scores. We need to abolish big data, right? And for me, that begins with how we define big data. Big data is more than a collection of technologies, a vast amount of information and different types of it. It's more than a revolution in measurement and prediction. And it's actually become, as you all talk about, through these sessions, a philosophy, an ideological regime about how decisions are made and who makes them. And it's given a legitimacy to a new form of social and political control that has taken the digital artifacts of our existence and found new ways to use them against us. And big data is not new, it's not novel or as revolutionary as we worship it to be. We'll have other events, Liquid Architecture folks, but I send folks over to my talk in Amsterdam where I talk about the historical foundations of big data, as well as my Data and Society talk. But big data is a part of a long and pervasive historical timeline of scientific oppression, aggressive public policy, and really the most influential political and economic system that it has and continues to shape the global economy, which is chattel slavery. So what does it mean to abolish big data? To abolish big data is to dismantle the powers that dismantle the structures, that concentrate the power of data into the hands of a few. And then to put that power into the hands of people who need it the most, right? And so when I talk about the work that I did in the past, and when I talk about the work that we're doing now, that's what it means to abolish big data, right? It's a call to action. It's a framework for how we see the abuses, the concentration of power around data, but also the opportunities and the stories of people going against the grain and in moments of survival and using data to actually build a new world, right? Build a world where all of our needs are being met. So, I can talk more a little about some of the things like specific projects that we're working on, but this is what really grounds our approach. And, to kind of connect it back to abolition, as we think about it right now, the abolition movement asks the question, the prison abolition movement, how do we, solve social problems without recourse to prisons, right? That's what it's about, It's about reimagining the social landscape. It's about, really creating new structures, new coalitions, new skills for us to not just dismantle and tear apart, but most importantly for us to build. In my opinion, abolition means the creation of something new. In the view of when we apply this lens of abolition to big data, the question is, how can we reimagine the structures and industries that concentrate the power of big data into the hands of a few? And how can we also abolish the structures that turn it into a deadly weapon? And this is not a call to end the use of all data. Actually, I love data. That's the whole point of why I started Data for Black Lives. And it's not, just as the call to abolish prisons is not a call to abolish accountability, right? But it's a call to abolish a punitive, violent system that simply just isn't working for society.
That's so powerful, Yeshi. I mean, I won't editorialize, just to say thank you for that sort of call to action, call to arms is amazing. I mean, I wonder if you could say something about how it relates to the COVID context, because I know you've done some work. You've got a report and a kind of a whole new project in relation to how that, how Data for Black Lives and how abolished big data hits the pandemic in America and beyond.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been really, we've been able to get funding from places like Democracy Fund, MacArthur Ford. We've been working with some amazing colleagues. Yes, at Google DeepMind, because I do believe there's folks within these institutions, just as our model goes, right, who are doing powerful and important work, sometimes within the belly of the beast. But, it's been incredible for me to kind of traverse borders and geographies and to see how different countries are responding to the crisis. Stopping into London and seeing what's happening there, coming here and seeing Paris right now, we're on the verge of a lockdown. But being in New York and seeing, even though the COVID cases have decreased, I'm seeing more people on the street. I've never seen more people come up to me, ask me, oh, can I have your bottle of water after you drink it because I want to recycle it for cash? Or can you, help us out for $30 for a pizza for me and my 4 kids? We drove up from South Carolina. And these are just proportionately Black people, right? When the COVID-19 crisis hit, at least internally at D4BL, we knew that, as folks say, when America catches the cold, Black communities catch the flu, right? And so we knew that this would disproportionately impact our communities. And I remember seeing so many headlines, New York Times, Forbes, all these publications writing about the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black communities. And literally, I go into their site and they're citing maybe the at that time in April, the 3 or 4 states in the US that were actually reporting COVID-19 data by race. And immediately I said, let's kick it into gear. We literally went to every single state, all 50 states, COVID-19 data open data websites. We listed out the ones who were reporting on race and the ones who weren't, and also what were the number of cases and number of deaths for Black communities, because we didn't have enough information. And also, again, in the context of society and a culture that, pathologizes Black communities, that denies the existence of structural racism, that has this logic of blame and personal responsibility that actually is, perpetuating this cycle of death and destruction. It was important for us to collect the data, but also to frame it and to bring together organizers, activists, folks from the UN, Working Group on People of African Descent, Black public health researchers. So we held an event called the Roundtable to serve as a pulse check for our movement, where we had a conversation about what was happening, what we were seeing, how were people doing. And then we also, our director of research, Jamel Watson-Daniel, led a team of amazing data scientists and software engineers to develop a code base where software engineers, software people, hackers, whoever, whatever your thing is, can go on and get real-time data from every single state in the US about the ways in which COVID-19 continues to impact Black communities in terms of cases and deaths. And for us, again, what does this mean, right? How do we put data into the hands of people who need it the most? How do we make sure that we're collecting, interpreting, and providing information, not in a vacuum, because nothing happens in a vacuum, but in a way for people to push for things like, eviction moratoriums in their cities, right? For people to push for more resources to reopen hospitals that have been closed, right? To fund public education, right? So, there's all these different uses and amazing ways that we're seeing folks use the COVID-19 data. We've been working with chief data officers in different states, but I think the biggest thing around it for us is, how do we make data as protest? How do we reclaim it as collective action? And how do we reclaim it as accountability? Right now, as I continue to hear about Black people and Indigenous people and folks that I know from the movement, in particular dying and perishing from COVID, but also in the next 5 to 10 years, which I believe and I predict from a empirical, but also spiritual sense, that the crisis has just begun and we're now only feeling the fallout of it. But again, we don't lose hope, right? We don't lose hope. We use this as an opportunity to build, right? We use this as an opportunity to reassess, right? We use this as an opportunity to come together and say, what does the world that we know is possible, what does that look like? Anyway, yeah.
Wow. Is there something, is there sort of, it's so inspiring to hear you speak like this, honestly. I mean, is there somewhere like the people, in Europe or wherever they're tuning in from can sort of do? Is there like the resources on the Data for Black Lives website? I see that you've got, a COVID tracker kind of, data set that people can sort of extraction tool that people can download, or are there any other kind of resources for organizing that you sort of want to draw people's attention to, or is it just a matter of kind of building locally, where they can?
It's about building locally, right?
Yep.
And, I mentioned earlier our Hubs program. We are actually bringing on a significant amount of new staff just because we have to respond to the demand for this kind of work in other countries. And so I definitely want folks to sign up as a member, join. Anyone can join, anyone, right? You don't have to be a software engineer, data scientist, or activist. All are welcome. My motto is more of us, less of them, right? And there's different ways to get involved. You can get involved just coming to our pulse checks. We're going to be having some trainings done by an amazing organizing shop, Midwest Academy, out of Chicago. And we want to make that resource open for people. We're going to have a ton of other workshops doing skill sharing. We're having our conference next July, TBD, at the MIT Media Lab. But, I think the highest level of involvement would be to lead a hub. And I've been so amazed by how we've gotten so much traction, but not surprised by folks here in Europe and also in the global South in particular. So those are areas that, yeah. And also, if you're really interested in being involved, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or like Twitter DM or something. But yeah, please join, please, and be a part of what we're trying to build in this moment.
Thanks so much, Yeshi. I mean, we could speak forever, but I think I'll let you go and leave it there. I mean, it was a pleasure and an honor speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you everyone who's here. And I have to jump, but I can't. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at all the, hey everybody. Oh wow. Okay. Oh, see. Hey Adeze. Okay, so yes, full power. I'm in a very particular mood right now. And this is, what does that mean for us? It means leaning into this moment, but from a place of rest is resistance, and from a place of joy. And what I was going to talk about too, but that I didn't get to, but I'm currently writing a manual for building in a crisis that we're going to give our new employees. But one of the ways that we frame our work of building solutions is around this idea that the only good system is a sound system. Our organizing models, our approaches, our cultural practices of people from the African diaspora, we think about amplification, we think about building power, right? We think about how do we take that individual experience, how do we make it collective and connect people in a way that's meaningful? And most importantly, before I leave, how do we make this moment more about temporary reform, but about long-term structural change? So thank you so much, James and everybody else. And good to meet you all. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Ishi.
Wow. That was such an incredible and powerful contribution by Yeshi. Thank you so much. Really, it's, I mean, we're going to move on now, but I think, those words and those ideas will resonate and reverberate across the rest of the session, and many of the things that we do going forward, and that they really are an incredible analysis and call to action. So thank you so much again, Yeshi. And I'd like to invite Mark Andrejevic to turn his camera on now, because Mark is going to present next in the curriculum, the listening with the pandemic. Hi, Mark. How's it going?
Good to be here. Thanks so much.
Very nice to see you. Mark's been someone that we've been thinking with over the last few years, since he relocated to Melbourne. He's a writer, researcher at Monash University. Mark's early work looked at reality TV and kind of, but before, let's say many of the kind of implications of the world that was being built in a reality TV paradigm became, the kind of the reality became more real than we expected. Let's say the reality TV president, was probably not something we necessarily saw coming, but maybe you did. And your work in surveillance studies has been really inspiring too. And Mark's recent book, Automated Media, published by Routledge, also introduced a number of concepts, terminology, ways of thinking that have been extremely important and productive in this project. And
we recorded an interview with Mark that had to be split into two parts, because we basically asked him to explain his entire history and book from beginning to end. So yeah, definitely get onto the interview section of the website if you want to listen to that. But I mean, Mark, for now, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, one of the concepts that came up very, very strongly was touchlessness, which kind of came out of the framelessness that you talk about in the book, and I believe that's sort of where you're going to go with this presentation today, if that's right.
Yes, thank you, and I was so glad that you guys were interested in listening, and I hope I'm not adding hopelessness to all of those other lessnesses. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the unceded land from which I'm speaking to you, the Boon-Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and to acknowledge any Indigenous people who may be with us today. I also want to thank James and Joel and Sean and all the folks involved in organizing this. It's been amazing. It's so rich. The materials that you've pulled together are really, it's just a feast when I go to that website and go exploring it. So thank you so much for all the work that you put into that. And you've successfully replicated in some ways, I suppose, the feeling of an in-person conference with all the late night sessions that have led to that kind of nice, excited exhaustion feeling as we culminate on the third day. So thank you so much, and thanks for including me. It's great to be here and to be with everybody. I'm going to put up some slides just because it helps me organize talking and hopefully keeps me on time. So I'm just going to set up the share screen. Sorry, it looks like the last slide is going to come up first. So I'm just going to go up to the beginning. Thanks. It's not over yet. So I'm going to start with all the discussion that we've had about coughing. Thought it might be interesting to add the visual element to the cough, and to use this as a way of introducing some meditations on the atmospherics of the COVID moment, and in particular the tension between the recognition on one hand that the pandemic has forced upon us of our irreducible interconnectedness and kind of biological and atmospheric entwinedness, which has now been featured to us as also a potential vector of contagion. And it's been really interesting watching the call for a collective response, which kind of recognizes this interconnectedness, the fact that we're all breathing each other's air and touching the fomites and traces that people have left behind, has been marshaled by those people who have a particular version of the individual as kind of hermetic and self-contained, that precisely sees the call for some type of a collective response as an impingement upon a version of autonomy. And it's that kind of back and forth movement between kind of the irreducible recognition that we're all kind of in this atmosphere that we're sharing together, as undergirding the need for a collective response, and the way in which the collective response gets framed through the technology that I want to say a few things about, and hopefully some productive thoughts. I'm really influenced by Shannon Mattern's observation in the essay that's come up earlier this evening, Urban Auscultation, about the machines that can listen from the macro to the micro scale. And it's that jump that I want to think about, and I'll try to frame it in a few ways, and then to discuss the kind of granular forms of biopower that I think are associated with the kind of mass individualization of monitoring that we see in response to the COVID moment. So some of this is influenced by recent work that I've been doing around facial recognition technology, which has taken me to a bunch of online trade shows. You can go to a lot of them now because they're all online. And one of the things that's been really interesting about those security trade shows, it gets to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the COVID moment as opportunity. Living in a time when the kind of discursive environment that I inhabit is kind of committed to the notion that this is an exceptional moment and that we'll get back to normal if we can respond in appropriate ways. This isn't what comes through in the security trade shows. This is framed from the security perspective as a kind of new normal in which the dimension of the recognition of interconnectedness as a vector of contagion in particular ways is seen as a business opportunity to kind of ramp up a technological response that has long-term implications, not just a kind of short, exceptional response. NEC, one of the big players in forms of facial recognition technology and other forms of monitoring and tracking, has pioneered their version of a touchless office that incorporates a range of technologies, including facial recognition as one of its dominant ones, to allow for workplace, for managing circulation in the workplace while reducing the possibility of touching and the need to touch. They've some of these formulations along the discussion of how long the virus can live in the air on surfaces. So they're utilizing facial recognition, other forms of distance monitoring in order to manage circulation within the office, and also to manage the interaction with objects in the office, logging into computers, vending machines, shops, and also gathering information about sites of congestion that can then be avoided. And what I think, what I want to kind of point to in this discussion is thinking about the relationship between touchlessness, the idea that, one of the shared responses is going to be to try to reproduce collectively some form of, hermetic bubble with the imperative of securing circulation and the security industry that's kind of growing up around this promise of securing circulation through technologies that operate at a distance. And I'm going to frame that by thinking about the kind of tension between the responses that we've seen can be framed through the relationship between plague response and endemic response, right? The plague response is one of kind of isolation, seclusion, and stasis, right? Stop circulation of people in order to stop circulation of the virus. The promise of stopping circulation of people, interestingly, if you go back to the earlier history of the framing of interactive technologies, I'm thinking of Bill Gates' The Road Ahead, but a lot of things that were taking place in the mid-90s around this kind of, what are the new forms of data mobility that will allow us to be more physically static, to stay where we are, at least certain folks in certain positions would be able to take advantage of this kind of flexibility of telecommuting. Others, of course, would be exploited by it. Bill Gates doesn't talk about that quite so much, but not just in terms of workplace behaviors, but in terms of sociality, cultural attractions that can be accessed at a distance. You won't work, so on, conferences. So if we look back at that moment of 1995, where Bill Gates was kind of excited about this possibility, if we frame it against the background of our current moment, it takes on quite a different set of associations. Of course, the reason that didn't come to pass quite in the way that Bill Gates imagined, I think, is that there's a productivity to circulation. And the anxiety of the current moment, or one of the anxieties, is a pandemic response which stops circulation. And one of the kind of technological promises to address the potential economic consequences of stopping circulation is to figure out how can we secure circulation, and how can we secure circulation in ways that incorporate the technological affordances. And it's this combination that's cropping up in so many different places, and we've seen a bunch of examples over the past couple of days. So I won't go through them, I won't dwell on them too much, but the notion that you could develop touchless, at a distance technologies that would be able to monitor in real time, because they take place at a distance, the flow of people and potentially large groups of people, in order to pull out those individuals who signal some type of a threat to a viral threat, contagion of some kind. So we've got, coupled with cameras, of course, heat detection, heat sensors that can capture particular individuals and pull them out of a crowd. In Hawaii, NEC has implemented in the main airport there a system that has reads body surface temperature, but links it to facial detection, takes a picture of the face, and then distributes it to security officials, who then comb through the crowd and pull out the people who are registering in elevated temperature, so that you could imagine the flow through the airport, and then people coming through and filtering out those people who pose potential threat. And so we're also seeing, as again we saw a little bit earlier today, the use of these individualized forms of monitoring and these technologies to imagine the possibility of preemption. The notion that a Fitbit can know that you've got COVID before you become symptomatic, and that some of these other sensors at a distance might be able to also do that same thing, to be able to in advance identify the potential vector. And that process of projected backwards further, right? Pre-symptoms, pre-even monitoring device detectable symptoms, to behaviors, of course, interactions, characteristics of one's social and work life, all of these things that might predispose individuals to be categorized into particular risk groups. But of course, this notion of finding a technology that's a monitoring technology that's used or that historically we might think of as a mass monitoring technology to pull out and to individualize, right? So this technology that we've seen on previous days too, the cough camera that links the locational capacity of a unidirectional microphone, presumably, with the ability to identify a particular face, therefore link where the sound came from, attach it to an identity, right? All of these, I think, one of the things that they're engaged in doing is thinking, how can you secure circulation? So how, if we move from thinking about plague exclusion to to endemic, to presence of the illness in the population, how can population level response, instead of being just directed towards the population, put disinfectant everywhere, get people to social distance, get people to wear masks, how can you actually make it granular in the sense of pulling out individuals? And then the next step, which I'm gesturing to with, this is one of the panels at one of these security conferences, the next step is to articulate the connection between these forms of individualization with modifications in the built environment, environmental forms of control and managing flows. The Hawaii airport already had people kind of going through and combing and pulling people out. What was striking to me about the security conference is, against the background of the COVID moment, there are 2 sessions that are devoted to doors, designing the ways in which automatic doors can function to facilitate touchlessness. But also, I can't help look at that without thinking about the ways in which doors as access technologies can be incorporated into the built environment in order to reinforce these forms of mass individualization, of the securitization of circulation. Lots of shuns in there. The example that comes to mind, you may have seen this when it was circulating last year, the convenience store in Tacoma, Washington that incorporated facial recognition technology into the actual physical capacity to enter into the space, right? The forms of social sorting. Here they were looking for folks who may have been flagged as potential security risks. So you've got to look into the camera and be identified before you can come in. But a helpful bystander
Please
comes
look at
along and
camera for
explains
entry.
you've got to stand in a particular place in order to have your face registered. So what I'm gesturing to is not only the technologies of mass individualization that rely on the ability to couple the kind of potential of unidirectional microphones and listening to identify in a crowd some kind of individuals that can be pulled out, but the connection of that to the way in which that data becomes operationalized as it's fed into automated forms of managing circulation that actually transform our physical environment and shape the way that we can move through it. And you can imagine all kinds of potentially dystopian consequences. Probably the one that I would gesture to, most is what that means for imagining the capabilities of collective response, this fantasy that we can engage in, treat what's taking place in terms of pandemic response if we can perfect a mass individualized form of monitoring. And that in some sense is offered as a counter to thinking about the collective forms of response that we might want to engage in to respond to the pandemic. Thanks for that. I hope I didn't go too much over. That's it.
Not at all, Mark. Not at all. Thanks so much. One of the things I loved about that presentation was the way that you connect the voice and listening to other regimes of kind of monitoring, and to say that it's not to situate listening or the politics of machinic listening in relation to a broader politics of kind of a sense of politics, basically, and to see the kind of the ideologies of individuation, as you're saying, or granular monitoring playing out similarly across those things. So I just wanted to draw attention to that because as we've talked about, this kind of the idea of machine listening always poses the question, machine listening as opposed to what, you know, and to say that machine listening, you know, is always also about other forms of sensory monitoring, you know, and to situate it that way is a really important provocation, especially at a music festival, you know, and an arts festival where we want to concentrate on listening, but we need to acknowledge as well the way in which it's embedded in relation to broader networks.
Yes, thanks for that. I mean, for the added distance technologies, right? We've got these kind of different affordances of the visual and the auditory, and the security apparatus is looking at ways to articulate those. How, you know, what are the ways in which they can be fit together? And I'm really interested in that cough camera stuff because of the way in which it moves in that direction of kind of granular biopower, right? How can we do population level interventions, but at the individual level?
Yeah, the idea of listening with the camera is quite an interesting one. Like to see the cough as well as, you know, identifying the cough by sound. Well, thanks, Mark. We'd love to, if you're able to stick around for some conversation there. I'm sure that people have questions and sort of and that you'll have some thoughts of your own in relation to other speakers. And I'm going to invite Thao Phan to switch on her camera now. Are you there, Thao? Hello, welcome, thank you. I mean, I'll just briefly introduce you to everybody. Yeah, I'm sure you'll introduce yourself too, but you know, Thao is a research fellow at the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization. She's a feminist STS researcher, and she's done a lot of work actually in the area of the kind of the politics of listening in relation to AI. She's got an amazing paper called Amazon Echo and the Aesthetics of Whiteness that we'll throw into the chat window, and another one, the materiality of the digital and the gendered voice of Siri, which actually you know, relates to a sort of another thread of that sort of come up a number of times throughout these last few days around the gendering of voice assistants and so on. But today, Thao, I think you're going to speak about some other work and a different way of thinking about listening in relation to you know, the politics of the pandemic.
Yeah. I'm going to pivot a little bit to what I usually talk about. So usually I speak on the technologization of race and gender and algorithmic culture. But today I really wanted to respond more directly to the provocation of this idea of listening with the pandemic by drawing in some of my new work, which at this stage is provisionally titled Listening Without Care. Like Mark, I'll begin by acknowledging that I'm calling to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nations, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. Also, like everyone else so far, I really wanted to extend a sincere thank you and to extend my gratitude to James and Joel and the whole team behind the scenes, not just for the invitation to come speak today, but for your meticulous labor in putting everything together in such a generous way and streaming it across platforms. It's really no easy feat. And I think if you haven't had a chance to hear applause, you can hear some now. Okay, so I'll get into it. In her brilliant essay on urban auscultation, or perceiving the action of the heart, Shannon Mattern provides a genealogy of urban surveillance and public health. She traces the history of instrumentalist listening and the techniques which allow humans to extend their capacities to listen. From techniques of succession in ancient Greece to the 19th century use of the stethoscope, through to the introduction of computational and algorithmic processes. Mattern maps the epistemological relation between how we listen and how this shapes us as listening subjects. Reflecting on our current pandemic moment, she asks, when the sounds of the pandemic recede, how will our hearing be changed? The introductory essay for this panel on the machine listening curriculum offers one grim take on the question. The authors write, every voice industry startup and tech juggernaut, every streaming platform, every military-funded machine diagnostics lab, every automated care industry device manufacturer has been ready and waiting for just this moment to spring into action with a quick technological fix that just so happens to bolster their positions. From the perspective of the machine listening industry, the pandemic is a dream come true. It gets to do what it was always going to anyway, only blanketed now in the twin auras of inevitability and social good. In my own research during this pandemic, I've been trying to listen to developers working in this very industry. Over the last 7 months, I've been spending time with an AI for Health team who have designed a remote monitoring system to track the symptoms of people who have tested positive for COVID-19. As we know, the highly infectious nature of the virus has meant that traditional means of health monitoring through face-to-face interactions are now complicated by the conditions of social distancing. In addition to this, the added strain on public health infrastructure caused by the slow erosion of funding and resources has meant that it's no longer practical or safe to treat all positively identified patients within a clinical medical setting. Enter the AI for Health team. They've designed a system that, in principle, works around these challenges. The system allows patients to take their own medical observations and self-report symptoms from home. A rule engine-based algorithm is used to assess these observations and assign risk categories to patients who are then formally assessed by remote clinicians. In listening to these developers, I'm trying to find out a few things. I want to get into the guts of the machine. I'm pressing my stethoscope against theirs so that I can hear how their system ranks and classifies medical risk, to find out what is measured and what is not, and to understand how the system operates as an apparatus that actively constitutes the virus within a clinical setting. But I'm also listening to the developers themselves. I want to know, what are the logistics of development under the conditions of lockdown? You know, how do development teams collaborate in isolation? How have the developers been affected by the very crisis that they're trying to address? And finally, how do all these factors impact on design decisions that ultimately shape the way we monitor and administer care for those who are affected by this disease? Over the course of listening, I hear almost exactly the kinds of discourse flagged by Mattern and the machine listening team. You know, I hear engineers praise the success of a system of care that can be administered at a distance. They celebrate the affordances of what Dan McQuillan calls a drone-like distancing in healthcare, one that instrumentalizes the view from above to replicate the diagnostic touch of the doctor in the age of touchlessness. I also hear discussion over the potential future directions of this system, how it could be used to monitor other chronic health conditions. I hear them discuss industry partners, potential sources of funding, commercializations. What other countries can we expand to next? What other sectors? Could this model, for example, be used to monitor population or community level mental health during long periods of social isolation, like the one we currently find ourselves in? In listening to the voices of those who design our machines, I hear the kinds of paradoxes and contradictions that define contemporary algorithmic culture. One example outlined by Celia Lurie and Sophie Day is the paradox of personalization, in which, in order for a platform like Spotify, for instance, to personalize its services for you, you must first be compared with others. In short, in the claim to individualize services, you are never actually apprehended as an individual. Another paradox discussed by Aaron Darmody and Thoughtlessness is that of choice. A platform like Facebook claims to use its algorithms to make content more relevant for its users. This is said to liberate people, to make better choices about what they want to see, post, share, and consume. But it contradictorily does so by actively controlling the choices available. Similarly, in my conversations, I hear operative contradictions. Using a machine-run automated system to try and cure people who are suffering from a profound sense of alienation and social disconnection, for example. Countering resource scarcity in a public health system by lobbying for investment in private tools is another example. I hear this system being operationalized as what in philosophy of medicine is called a pharmacon, a substance that holds in play the possibility of both remedy and poison. Here it's not so much the poison that cures, but the cure that keeps a society sick. And just to be clear, this is not a critique of my interlocutors, who during the course of their clinical trial genuinely saved lives. Rather, this is a critique of the milieu they operate within, in which no matter how ethical and competent they are, no matter how rational and innovative their system, it cannot escape this culture of contradictions. Now I want to close with a very quick reflection on my own experience of listening during this pandemic. And what has been the most difficult thing about trying to listen and to do this labor is that what I mostly hear are the pings of Outlook email alerts. Ping, please attend our upcoming wellbeing seminar on mindfulness during uncertainty. Ping, Benestar has uploaded their resources on practical strategies to help you maintain a healthy diet during lockdown. Ping, an email from the Vice Chancellor outlining how total revenue is expected to fall between 8 and 14% this year, what equates to $90 and $190 million respectively. As a result, the university will be permanently cutting 400 positions. Though, as we will later learn through the Education Union's auditing, is that this number is actually closer to 3,000 positions once we include casual and contract staff who don't have the dignity of a redundancy package, but who are just simply not rehired. Ping, all staff are asked to confirm their best postal address so that they may receive a special care package from the university. The package arrives and it comes with a mask and a university branded hand sanitizer keychain. Mine, of course, arrives already broken. Alongside these gifts are a list of self-care tips. One of these tips includes hacking the happiness chemical oxytocin by doing simple things like hugging your family or holding a hand, options that are, of course, explicitly discouraged under the conditions of lockdown. So like the AI health systems that I've been researching, I hear in these pings a cruel contradiction when it comes to administering care. The more the institution attempts to gesture towards or express its care, the more it exposes a deep neglect. And like my research, this has nothing to do with the individual institution. I think every person who works at a university could find in their inbox right now an example of this kind of misplaced wellness messaging. Once again, this is symptomatic of something else. A deep contradiction in the way we currently approach care. If we think of care not as an object that one simply gives to another, but as a process that manifests only through time, through energy, through resources, through human connection, then why would we ever think that an AI employed precisely because it promises to efficiently erase all those things, why would we think it was up for this challenge? As many pointed out, this kind of anecdote illustrates how we were sick well before the pandemic ever arrived. So I'd really like to end now by responding to Shannon Mattern's question posed at the start of this piece and at the start of the session more broadly, with a segment from a poem written by Dan McQuillan in 2018 called Losing Your Voice. So Mattern asks, when the sounds of the pandemic recede, how will our hearing be changed? McQuillan writes, to ask what our machines might hear is the voices of the psychiatrists who are busy founding startups, or in the voices of politicians justifying cuts in services because they paid off the banks, or in the voice of the nurse who tells someone forcibly detained under the Mental Health Act, this ain't a hotel, love. It's possible that prediction is not a magic bullet for mental health and can't replace the places of care staffed by people with time to listen. In a society where precarity, insecurity, and austerity don't fuel generalized distress, where everyone's voice is not analysed but heard, in a context which is collective and democratic. Thanks very much.
Thao, thank you so much. Such an amazing contribution to the curriculum. So many incredible references for us to follow up on. And I mean, as those pings kept on coming, it was sort of getting more and more desperate in a way. But I think there was also in the politics of care that you describe, the care that an AI can't possibly, let's say, reproduce. That there was a kernel of optimism too. So, at least in my reading of it, let me think it's there, even if it's not. But I really enjoyed that, and I'm also really looking forward to some of those ideas that you've introduced being kind of reflected back in conversation with others a little later. So thank you again for that amazing contribution.
Yeah, thanks so much, Thao. I wasn't actually meant to pop my head up, but I just feel like I needed to acknowledge and say thank you.
No worries, thank you. Yeah, I tried to end on a more hopeful note because I think, like Yeshi, I also wrote that in a mood.
Well, it's a pervasive mood, and I mean, let's find out what mood Vladan Joler is in. Hopefully, we find him in good spirits. Vladan, are you joining us from Novi Sad in Serbia?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm joining you from the bottom of Pannonian Sea. So I think, I don't know how many thousands years ago this was like a sea, and now we're on the bottom of the sea. But yeah, and now it's a swamp. Yeah.
Well, from an ocean to a swamp, that doesn't sound like a positive transformation, but it's really nice to have you here in the lead up to these sessions here at Unsound. We had some really excellent conversations with Vladan, 2 conversations which have been brought together as an interview in the curriculum, which you can listen to. And of course, we talked a lot about Vladan's amazing work with Share Lab, his practice of producing these sort of experimental data investigations, and maps, and especially the anatomy of an AI system, which is the project that Vladan worked on collaboratively with Kate Crawford. Kate, of course, opened the program here at the machine listening curriculum in conversation a couple of nights ago, so brilliantly. And that I'm sure Vladan will mention it, but just because the subject of that map is the Amazon Echo, the voice user interface, it was a really incredible resource for us to think about, let's say, voice machine listening, extraction of sonic data in massively expanded terms, in the terms necessary to do a kind of a labor data, geopolitical analysis, which is the one that, is necessary. And yeah, in the conversation of that interview, you also mentioned your new project and gave us a glimpse of it, the new extractivism project. So, the invitation for you today was to share some of those ideas, that reflect a little bit on the question of pandemic listening. And thanks once again for being here with us. And I'll hand it over to you.
No, it's really, really a pleasure. And I really enjoy this is maybe a 3rd iteration of our talks and interviews, and it was really, really, really nice. And I will maybe start with I will share screen because I usually feel naked without map. Just a second. Okay. So so this is this. I'm usually known as the guy who is making some kind of big black, mostly depressive maps. And this is one of them, and probably one of the most famous one, called Anatomy of an AI System. But I would like to follow up on this, because usually I was not thinking a lot about listening. as something that I'm doing all the time, but then after like listening to the interview with Shannon, I realized, especially when she was speaking about this listening of infrastructure, that this is exactly what I was doing for a really long time, and then I kind of realized as well that for me, all of this research and those investigations into like those invisible infrastructures and systems started with something, again, that we heard in the last presentation, started with pinging those servers, with basically listening, trying to listen, like, for example, sonar, those sounds of like how those like the little internet packets are basically backing into those infrastructures and coming back to me. So I really thank you for for giving to me this insight in a way that I'm a listener of infrastructure. And basically, so what I was doing for a long time, it's like just trying to go deeper and deeper, you know, like starting from home, and it always comes from home, and always most of the time it comes from, you know, my room and in which I'm sitting now. So in that sense, this kind of lockdowns is basically nothing special for me, because like I was doing most of my research from home, listening to different infrastructures.
Vladan, I'm so sorry to interrupt you,
yeah.
but I think ever since you shared your screen, there's been a bit of a kind of crackle coming through on the audio.
So is it good now?
Yeah. Funnily enough, since I've interrupted this, the audio has been better. I don't know what it is, but we could understand what you were saying, but it was kind of, there was a bit of a kind of a crackle in your speech. So I don't know if it's obvious to you what the hack is, but I just thought I'd sort of intervene, just so that there's
sorry. I will go back and then slowly maybe you just tell me if we don't hear you, okay?
Okay, no worries.
Or I can go around my home and say to all of the people here, stop to using internet. Nah, it's okay. So basically, I was explaining how in last 5-6 years, I was trying to listen different infrastructures and trying to go deeper and deeper, and it started with listening to internet infrastructure and listening to networks, listening to devices attached to those networks. And then I was going deeper and deeper into different layers of untransparencies, trying to understand, you know, like where the data is going to, how the data is being stored. And then by time I was like finishing at the end in some kind of deep jungles of like algorithmic processes, and that I was trying to understand how they work. But then in one moment, everything became much more complex, because I was like kind of like, you know, turned into someone who is trying to understand all of those systems, but in a deep time. And then this is how we started to do those like investigations. And then they were starting from elements, from Earth, from minds, and trying to follow them up and trying to understand something about those basically fractal chains of production. And then I understood, you know, that it's not just like algorithmic black boxes, but the production of those devices that are becoming part of infrastructure, also some kind of black boxes. It's really hard to investigate. And so in sense of the talk that we had today, it's also like really interesting to think in the sense of this COVID and pandemic situation, you know, like how this pandemic is influencing or changing this map. And then, I realized because like big part of this map, it's about inequalities, it's about like comparing the person who is working in a mine in Congo and Jeff Bezos. That's like, like some kind of 1 to 7 billion, and then in the same sense, like this, it's a similar with pandemic, so I have some kind of this privilege of being at home and like speaking to you through those like networks and stuff like this. But in a sense, like even in my nearest neighborhood, the person who is working on the counter or the person in the supermarket doesn't have this kind of option to isolate, And for me, so, this inequality, scale of inequality that was presented in Anatomy of an AI System is also, present in this kind of like, inequalities within the pandemic. But also it's interesting, like, because what we are also seeing we are seeing now maybe some kind of disturbances in production chains, but I will not speak about this a lot in this moment. But what I wanted to present to you today, and it's something I'm really sorry, maybe it will not sound so coherent, because this is basically the first time that I'm presenting this kind of publicly, is another project that's called New Extractivism, and in a sense, it's again a map. It looks like I'm not able to run away from that, but this time it's white, so it's not so, no, so it's white, and in a sense, like I had this, with in the beginning, I was mostly doing some kind of data analysis, data visualization. And then with the Anatomy of an AI System, it's not about data anymore. It's about like, it's about some kind of cartography of the planetary scale system. And now it's with the New Extractivism, I completely went out of because it's really hard to go after an anatomy that had this kind of huge, big scale into whatever. But for a long time, I had this obsession with like, trying to draw and trying to visualize different concepts. So not like data, like reflection of reality, but philosophical concepts and ideas of artists, media theories. And then I was thinking a lot about, what will happen if, for example, you have some kind of threesome between Hieronymus Bosch, Deleuze, and maybe some Microsoft patent artist. So I had in my mind this kind of like a big painting.
Vladan, can I just interrupt for one moment?
Yeah.
The threesome between Bosch, Deleuze, and Microsoft sounds absolutely amazing. But
should we go deeper into that?
I just wanted to check because on the share screen we're still seeing Anatomy of an AI. So I just wanted to check whether you were intending for us to see new extractivism. So
okay, sorry for the worst presentation in the universe. Okay, is it okay now?
Perfect. Thank you.
So this is so it's a new map. It's a white one, and so we have this kind of threesome of those people. And then in the same moment, I was thinking, okay, in this sense, I really had this idea of assemblage as something that I want to do. So this is some kind of assemblage of different concepts and allegories surrounding these ideas that are basically explaining new extractivism, explaining this kind of like in the same way exploitation of data, exploitation of nature, and so on. So let me start from the top. So it's starting with this idea of gravity. That there is a fantastic artist. Her name is Louise Drew, and I was really obsessed after I heard and read what she was writing about this idea of gravity. How, for example, different those like companies such as Amazon, Facebook, Google how we can think about them as some kind of, like the black stars, black holes, and how they are basically curving the time and space of the internet in a sense. And then I was thinking about this little person who is like swimming and trying to basically run away, trying to run away from this like force that is pushing this person into the hole. And then I was thinking like this gravity that is like creating those like big holes. it's not just about number of users, but basically there's a lot of different forces that are shaping this. It's fear of missing out, different forms of depression, efficiency and productivity, a lot of crazy things. And then at the end, this person is passing this point of no return and falling into this, falling down into second allegory that again, it's of course, what's the second allegory? It's the allegory of the cave. And in combination of panopticon, so this person is falling into the cave, this cave it's a cage, and this cave it's a prison. And so we are now falling into another part of the story. Then I was thinking a lot about, for example, what this cave, how this cave look like in contemporary society. So it's basically some kind of box. On one side, we have a projection, we have an interface, and in a way, what we are seeing on this interface is in a way like some kind of it's a directed play, directed by algorithms, directed by machines, directed by big data, big companies. Another side, so the light of those screens is creating the shadow back of us. It is basically becoming a resource, and then a lot of different capture agents are collecting different data out of it. So in the same sense that place, it's not just a cave, it's also a factory, it's also like a office place where, because of course what we are doing, we are all the time in this digital labor triangle, being a labor, being a resource, being a product. And then the story goes, and I don't think I have a time, but it goes deeper and deeper. And then I'm mixing these different ideas of individuals, creating individuals, then of bubbles, of really, tens and tens of different concepts that are mixed into one really crazy picture. And this is, for example, the one that I really like. It's about so this person is standing on the top of this kind of extraction engine, because those extraction engines are extracting, whatever they can extract in a sense. But in most of the situation, the resource, it's us, our bodies, our emotions. Engines are going deeper and deeper and deeper. But this person is standing on the edge of this engine of extraction and looking to the some kind of land beyond. And then I am discussing here something about what's behind this border, ever expanding border of extraction. What's behind, what is not conquered, how we can protect what is not conquered, how we can protect what is behind this imaginary and always expanding border of extraction. And then I'm speaking again about different forms of exploitation, different forms of how, and we also talked today a bit about resolution, how those systems of extraction goes from mega scale into some kind of nano pico scale, because everything is a potential frontier for colonization, frontier for extraction. It can be small as a one proton of light, or it can be big as a Earth or planet, Mars or whatever. And I don't think I have a lot of time to continue, but this is what I try to do. I try to somehow try to put on one paper and to create some kind of big, messy, crazy story about different concepts and allegories that most of us know from different people, but now they're mixed into one assemblage. And if we speak about the question of pandemic, I will probably go back to the, maybe I don't need to do this visually, but to this person in that cave, in that prison, and to say that those walls are now even stronger, because we are, most of us, we are now sitting in our homes, and now the power of the screen, the power of the interface, it's stronger and stronger in a sense of like we don't have another option. So for example, I'm really enjoying, like every few days I'm on some conference or like festival, and there is this like and all of them, they say like come half an hour before, and then there is a spectacle of different things that we do all of those half an hour before, techniques, how the Zoom will act this, you can press this, you can, like we are so deeply into those like caves now and trying to express ourselves to those like membranes of those interfaces. For example, now this is the interface of Zoom, and we give our best to make the best festival in this interface, so the power is strong. Okay, this went really crazy. Okay, thank you.
No. It was fantastic, and the thing is, like the audio was cutting in a little bit, in and out a little bit, but the power of the images is so strong, and I just love the way that the kind of the move from the data visualizations or the kind of the infrastructure visualizations into the allegory and the kind of the visual language that kind of retains that kind of very diagrammatic, very kind of literal, objective kind of aesthetic in a certain kind of way, but mapping out into the allegory. I mean, is this work that's going to be available online at some point for people who want to sort of dig deeper into it? Or
Sure. I think like somewhere around like maybe in 2 weeks it will be available first in one exhibition that is happening in Darknet.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we do our best to entertain ourselves in these times. so it's something curated by Eva and Franco Mattes, and then I think after 1 week I will publish this in form of some kind of website and PDF and this kind of.
Great. Thanks so much, Vladan. I really look forward to digging into it a little bit more deeply as well.
Thank you. Sorry for sound quality.
Not at all. It's bound to happen.
It's us from the third world,
Someone
you cannot expect.
Someone on the WhatsApp group described the quality of sound as an auto critique, of the medium. So
Yeah.
I think we'll go with that.
Yeah. Cool.
So Vladan, we'll invite you back a little bit later to chat with Shannon and Mark and Thao and to sort of see out the session. But now I want to introduce Andrew Brooks and invite Andrew to turn his camera on. And it's very nice to see you, Andrew. You're someone, of course, whose work has been inspirational in this thinking, in this program, and been someone that we've been thinking with for a long time now. Andrew's an artist and poet, writer, teacher, musician, based on Gadigal land in Sydney. He's done a lot of work in liquid architecture projects, a lot of work on the politics of listening, and your piece tonight is in the form of a set of propositions, 5 propositions on listening and breath, and there's going to be a bit of an experimental sort of participatory element to it, which I guess will become clear as we go along. So thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll start as well by saying that I'm broadcasting to you from unceded Wongal land, land that was taken by force by colonists, and land in which many resistances to colonization continue today. Resistances that I'm always trying to learn from and feed into where I can. And I want to acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and acknowledge Wongal elders past and present. A couple of very quick thank yous to join the rest of the thank yous. Firstly, thank you so much to James, Joel, and all of the crew at Liquid Architecture and Unsound for the invitation to be here tonight. It's really wonderful to be part of this project. It's really wonderful to be part of a project that seeks to build a curriculum outside of the kind of institutional collapse that we're like in the midst of at the moment. It feels so vital and necessary to be doing study together in spaces, you know, finding new ways to do study together. So I'm really thrilled to be part of that. And I want to thank everyone for the past few nights who's presented. That's been a really wonderful program. And in particular tonight, Sean, Yeshi, Mark, Thao and Vladan for these incredibly rich provocations and incredibly rich sharing this incredible work that you've been working on. So I'll dive into it. As Joel and James said, I'm going to offer a short piece tonight that I've called 5 propositions on listening and breath, that tries to think through some of these questions: listening, breathing, machines, the pandemic, as well as some of the things I'm kind of preoccupied with, kind of race, capital, resistance, I suppose, and then to perhaps finish with some type of collective experiment and kind of listening together over this platform, which will genuinely be, you know, a short experiment, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, I'll dive into it. I Can't Breathe, a plea uttered by George Floyd on May 25, 2020, as he was murdered by a police officer who knelt on the back of his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. 3 words that index the negation of Black life and the dismissal of Black pain. 3 words that link George Floyd and Eric Garner and David Dungay Jr. and so many others in what Christina Sharp refers to as the archives of breathlessness. A single phrase that reveals at once the violence of white supremacy, policing as an operation of segregation, and the continuation of forms of dispossession foundational to the settler state. An utterance that contains within it the history of racialization, the negation of Blackness as that which guarantees the value of whiteness, an ordering of the world that conceives of Black flesh as both disposable and fungible, a refrain that reveals the irreducible relation of Blackness and indigeneity, an index of a world conceived in slavery and christened in genocide, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore puts it. 3 words that reverberate the originary trauma produced by the colonial world-making project and the violence of the Middle Passage, which, as Hortense Spillers tells us, reduced Black people to flesh, stripping them of a body and its capacity to signify. The violent policing of Black life produces this relation over and over again. I Can't Breathe is a phonic trace of the anti-Black racism that organises the world. The clinical term for shortness of breath is dyspnea, a constricted chest, gasping for air, shallow breaths, a continuous feeling of being winded. I Can't Breathe also indexes the pandemic. The constraint of breath is a symptom of the coronavirus currently wreaking havoc on the world. Against this constriction, politicians implore us to get back to work, to return to productivity, to acknowledge the inevitable deaths that will occur, and to do our duty to reopen and revive the global economy. There is, of course, a relation between the theft of Black breath and the global pandemic. As activists and scholars have long told us, racism is a public health issue. It's no surprise that COVID hits Black and brown communities the hardest, that access to health services is unevenly distributed along race and class lines. While the virus may not discriminate, a world structured by the racial capital relation does. How do we listen for that which constrains the breath? How do we listen for the breath that escapes constraint?
I found your most recent message from Astrid Lagrange. Aristotle tells us, voice is a kind of sound characteristic of what has soul in it. Nothing that is without soul utters voice. Would you like to reply.
Aristotle claimed that the voice is the seat of the soul. Nothing that is without soul utters voice, he told us. But what are we to make of the machinic voice, the algorithmic voice, the voice that speaks but does not breathe? The machine listens, follows commands, answers questions. The voice of Alexa or Siri or Google is still a voice, one that was once connected to a living, breathing subject. Susan Alice Bennett was born in 1949 in Burlington, Vermont. She went on the road with Roy Orbison and Burt Bacharach, singing backup vocals for the two crooners. She has a kid and lives in the suburbs. She's been the voice of Delta Airlines, has sold us cars, burgers, white goods, credit cards, holidays, and more. She has a body and desires. In 2005, she was paid an hourly rate to record countless sentences, phrases, and words by the software company Scansoft. She recorded every day during the month of July for at least 4 hours a day. Her words were then edited, chopped up, concatenated, sampled, mixed, compressed, and fed into an algorithmic system that became Apple's virtual assistant Siri. She never received royalties or any cut of iPhone profits. The idea of the soul, or at least the performance of something that might be crudely equated with the concept of the soul, has been of great interest to capitalists for some time now. Much energy has been spent on how affect can be harnessed to produce surplus value. Making the customer feel reassured, managing the customer's effective life has become part of the job. This is true of Siri too. The machinic voice must be calm, reassuring, confident but not threatening, and always available. But as Ali Russell Hochschild tells us in her study of the emotional labour demanded of flight attendants, this labour produces a further sense of alienation in the worker, a further detachment of body from soul. Hochschild writes, this labour requires one to induce or suppress feeling in order to sustain the outward countenance that produces the proper state of mind in others. Beneath the difference between physical and emotional labour, there lies a similarity in the possible cost of doing the work. The worker can become estranged or alienated from an aspect of self, either the body or the margins of the soul that is used to do the work. So perhaps Aristotle had it wrong. Perhaps it's not the voice that is the seat of the soul, but all the corporeal noises that produce the voice and index the body. The complexity of the status of the voice is that it is both of the body and in excess of the body, both physical and phantasmagorically transcending that physicality. Aristotle's account of the voice ascribes it to a position or register beyond the body, giving rise to the image of a pure or dematerialized voice. Here, the corporeal noises of the body are separated from the purity of the voice. Francis Dyson observes that for Aristotle, the voice is a significant sound, not the sound merely of air respired as coughing is, but rather a sound that travels via the windpipe where it is struck by the soul, excised of all extraneous noises, including those associated with respiration. This pure voice no longer contains any trace of the body. For this reason, Dyson can say, Aristotle holds his breath in order that the soul might speak. This disembodied voice can only ever be a projection of both the metaphysical soul and an idealized, healthy, productive subject. How might we listen for noises that condition the voice then? Might such a listening move us towards the reclamation of our physical and psychic lives outside the capital relation and its compulsion for exploitation? And might an attention to the breath lead us away from ourselves and back toward each other? Nathaniel Mackey tells us when breath becomes an object of attention, no longer unremarked on, no longer taken for granted, no longer an unexpected given, anxiety is also in the air. The pandemic has amplified a persisting atmosphere of anti-Blackness that has sparked waves of riot that respond to the ongoing violence and inequality of racial capitalism. A Wendy's fast food restaurant goes up in flames. The fire that engulfs the restaurant was set by protesters revolting over the killing of a Black man, Rashard Brooks, by police in the parking lot of the restaurant in Atlanta, Georgia. This fire is one of many that rage across the world. Fires that have spread from Minneapolis, where protesters burnt down the 3rd precinct building of the police department on May 28 in the wake of George Floyd's murder. A wave of destruction, riots, looting, fires has erupted across the US and the world following these latest extra-legal killings of Black people. In the streets, the call for the abolition of policing and the carceral state goes louder every day. Against these calls, liberal commentators tell us that burning and looting and other acts of destruction are not the answer to the problem we are confronted with. But such arguments reveal an incapacity to hear what is really going on. The riot, a song of rage and destruction, is not posed as an answer, but rather an open question. How can we make a different world? The noise of the riot is an expression of what Saidiya Hartman calls the chorus, which she describes as an improvised collective formation, an incubator of possibility, an assembly sustaining dreams of the otherwise. When we listen to the terrible beauty of the chorus, we are listening to and for possibility. But how do we listen when we are apart? How do we attune to this song of rage and grief? How do we join the chorus? Can listening allow for a meaningful politics of solidarity to emerge? Perhaps this might involve listening for that which we cannot hear but might feel, vibrational movements, resonances, and lingering echoes. Tina Kemp reminds us all sounds consist of more than what we hear. Sound is an inherently embodied modality constituted by vibration and contact. Such a model of listening is concerned with tapping into what Paul Gilroy terms a politics of a lower frequency, which we might think of in terms of organized disorganization, anarchic movements that incessantly search for a way out of the double bind of modernity and racial capital. Might we listen to the vibrational intensity of images like this one in order to attune to the rage and the grief contained within them? In turn, might we understand the circulation of such images via platform media as a type of machinic listening involving a complex assemblage of actors, humans, algorithms, platforms, hardware, software, and so on and so on. The generativity of viral images revolves around their relatability and affectivity. And while platforms are continuously searching for novel ways to co-opt and extract value from images and users, it is also true that the spread of collective political movements relies on the instantaneous circulation of digital content these days. Things go viral because they enable collective, heterogeneous capacity to affect and be affected, writes Anna Monster. Listening to images then might be one crucial way of developing this politics of a lower frequency. I Can't Breathe not only indexes a relation of constraint and precarity, but implores us to seek a way out, to find an escape. Ashen T. Crawley. I Can't Breathe charges us to do something, to perform, to produce otherwise than what we have. We are charged to end, to produce abolition against the episteme that produced for us current iterations of categorical designations, of racial hierarchies, class stratifications, gender binaries, mind-body splits, a desire for otherwise air than what is and has been given, the enunciation, the breathing out of the strange utterance of otherwise possibility. As the pandemic continues, so too does the noise of the chorus. This noise is one with multiple centers, a polyphonic enunciation that cannot be contained, a sonicity of continuous discontinuity. The noise has an aesthetic dimension, a collective breathing out of otherwise possibilities, a collective invocation of different futures. Breath cannot be extinguished, but breath cannot be fully captured either. Perhaps attention to the possibilities of breath and the possibilities of breathing together, of conspiring together, might lead us to embrace the possibility of improvising a different world. Writing of another riot more than a century ago, Saidiya Hartman writes, improvisation, the aesthetic possibilities that resided in the unforeseen, collaboration in the space of enclosure, the secondary rhythms of social life capable of creating an opening where there was none. Machines are now very much part of the way we hear the world. We cannot simply reject them, dismiss them as instruments of surveillance, constraint, and control, although, of course, they are. Rather, we might consider how they might facilitate new modes of listening that allow us to attune also to the dynamics of escape. Black music, which has long been concerned with breath and blowing, constraint and escape, limits and freedom, might teach us something about how to listen in this moment, mediated as it is by more and more sophisticated machines and systems and networks of capture. As Nathaniel Mackey says, blowing is belief, a stubborn, mind-made-up magic or mantra, the straight lick hit with a crook stick, the way made out of no way. The more wind you use, as woodwind and brass teachers like to say, the more wind you have, as though flesh were spirit, spirit flesh, flesh willing. We can't simply blow our way out of the pandemic, but we might learn from this music and continue to find a way to blow our way out of the structures that produce differential vulnerability to premature death, to invoke Ruth Wilson Gilmore's definition of racism. Let's breathe together, even though we are apart. Okay, so thank you so much. That's the kind of provocations, I suppose. I wanted to finish now with a kind of short listening experiment, and I know James and Joel are kind of very patiently beginning to unmute people, and if you are able to, and if you would like to, please do unmute yourself now. And so I kind of wanted to take this moment just to kind of think about how we might breathe together while we are unable, in many cases, to kind of meet and breathe and conspire and resist and think in the same room and in the same space and in larger groups. So yeah, I wanted to invite us to kind of take a moment to just kind of do a little breathing experiment. So take a moment, turn your microphone on if you can. Take a moment to wriggle and shake out some energy. I know we've been sitting here for a while now. And then if you'd like to get comfortable, get yourself into a comfortable position. You might like to lie down or find a way of sitting that's easy on the body. Try to be still if you can, but of course don't force it. You might allow your eyes to close or keep them open, that softened glaze or something. And then perhaps turn your attention to the breath. And try to listen for the natural rhythms of your body breathing now. Don't try to change your breath, just stay with it and listen to it. Try to pay attention to it. Try to feel the inhalations and the exhalations. Try to tune into the noise of your body. Are your breaths short or long? Are they fast or slow? What do you hear as you breathe? How is your breathing constrained? Is it constrained by structures, by technologies, by underlying health conditions, by emotional states or stress levels? And how does your breathing move you to pleasure and joy? How does it bring life, perhaps, as Yeshi invited us to think about earlier today? Try to pay attention to what it feels like to draw the breath in and out of the body and listen for the noises your body makes as you do this. Can you hear your chest rise and fall, for example? Can you hear the fleshiness of your body? Can you hear your blood circulating? And I'll stop talking in a moment and we can just take a moment to listen to our bodies, but perhaps we might also think about how we might try and turn our attention outwards as well. And once you've kind of taken a moment to listen to yourself, try and listen and see what we might hear through this unmuted space, breathing in and out together on Zoom through the platform. through this very strange platform we've all become quite familiar and intimate with. Can you listen for the breath of another on this call? Can you try to imagine your breath extending to another? Can we listen for the collective rhythm that our breath makes together? And perhaps consider also the possibilities that arise from breathing together, the futures we might make, the challenges and obstacles we might confront, the possibilities and promises that we might find there.
Okay, well, I can hear a kind of unnatural silence at this point. So I think that might be the cue to bring that extraordinary shared moment of collective silence, if not to a close, maybe just to a pause. And, you know, thank Andrew for a really powerful and excellent presentation. As always, thank you so much, Andrew. And now we're going to... Oh, absolute pleasure. And now we're going to invite Shannon Mattern to join us. And then after Shannon, all of the guests who've spoken today. And thank you so much, Shannon, for being here. And so many of the people who've spoken today have referenced your work, and especially the essay, which, you know, we all drew a huge amount of inspiration from in sort of framing this session and framing this conversation. So thanks so much for being here at what is also a very, very early morning on your side.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's not so much early anymore. And in that light, I'll also note that we've been sitting here, all of us have been sitting here for a long time, so I'll try to keep this brief. But first, I also want to acknowledge that I am joining you from the unceded territory of the Lenape people in Manhattan. And it was quite a challenge with these 6 powerful talks to find a way to take notes during them, and then to, in real time, try to summarize some of the main themes and put them together into a small composition that I can share with you here now. So just some of the things that I was noticing throughout these, again, 6 really powerful presentations and multiple modalities, is that many of them, we focused on thinking about taking tiny auditory indices of complex planetary systems. And even the most seemingly asemic of sounds, the things like the ping, the cough, the breath, the stuff that would normally be edited out in a kind of a formal presentation or an official transcript, having tremendous, not only semantic value, but also indexing things that are way beyond kind of the context of their performance. It could be kind of the accidental production of an individual body, but when taken collectively, they represent much larger global phenomena that resonate across time and space. Also, the power of things like misrecognition, breathlessness, the malfunctioning or the breathless body. We've heard, those of us who study infrastructure have heard this trope for quite a while now, of the power of seeing, looking at the invisible, making visible the invisible. But a lot of these presentations also reminded us to listen to the inaudible, and what the politics of that are, of rendering, of giving, here I'm using ocular-centric metaphors, the power of both remaining inaudible and what other new kind of potentials come from making audible the inaudible. It reminds us, as Yeshi pointed out, of this, what subjects are not represented in our data sets and why they might not be. And again, reminding us again, in some cases, remaining inaudible, just as remaining invisible might be a choice, it might be a politically advantageous position to take. Also, listening to the inaudible reminds us of the mechanics of the voice. We heard several presentations, and especially those including all these kind of paratextual sounds, the cough, the breath, etc. They remind us of the voice is a mechanical operation, the fact that our bodies are instruments. They can malfunction on occasion. In the same way that Vladan's diagrams, not only the one he shared with us today, but a lot of his previous works, opens up the black box of an AI, reminding us that both AI and our own bodies, our voices, have corporeality, they have circulatory and excretory systems. They have kind of multiple forms of energy and nourishment that have to make them possible. Many of the presentations also talked about the potential of amplifying, funneling, scaling up. Mark's talk looked at how by listening at, again, perhaps micro scales, we can scale up to actually reshape the built environment. We look at voices, individual voices joining either in a shared physical space or across a digital platform, as like the one we're on now, that are joining in uprising or in protest. We look at pings kind of unifying in a global chorus of kind of corporate affected care. We looked at the power of amplifying the cough, the breath, as a potential means to amplify, to listen to things, to various global phenomena from, as Sean pointed out, the historical sonic registers of capitalism through tuberculosis. We can listen to the pandemic. We can also hear again across the globe the sounds of racial injustice. We can listen to the breathlessness that comes from the smoke of wildfire, which again indices a global form of climate change. And also, as we listen across these scales, we have a shift in fidelity and granularity and amplitude, which also imply a shift in ontology and epistemology. What can we know from the grainy or glitchy sound or the high fidelity, hi-fi sound? Andrew also alluded to the concept or the methodology of listening to images, which I'm not sure if you mentioned it, Andrew, in your talk. I was trying to take notes, but of course, as a reference to Tina Camp's work about the potential methodology of listening to the voiceless, giving visibility to the invisible through trying to hear through images. Images capturing cross-scalar modes of listening, which also makes me think of Hito Steyrl on the potential value of defending the poor image. What can we extract from the lo-fi auditory file or audio file? Which leads me to my final point about the power of the glitch. So Vladan's talk, which was kind of semantically rich in its very glitchiness, the fact that maybe we could not always discern every single word that he was offering, but its presence, the presence of the glitch reminded us of the global networks that are connecting us and the global politics. Vladan make a joke saying, I'm calling in from the third world or the developing world. That again reminds us that infrastructures connecting us are not kind of globally uniform in their degree of fidelity or accessibility. I'm also wondering, again, if we were to do a live transcription of this very talk, if we were to turn on the machine transcription in Zoom, how it would make sense of the very glitches, what the transcript is going to look like from this event. How will it make sense of the breaths, the coughs, Vladan's glitches, etc. Which also makes me think about, again, and also with Andrew, is the poetics of the unmuted. how would a machine transcription make sense of the last 5 minutes that preceded my kind of interrupting that silence? Just a couple days ago, I participated in an online, I wasn't a participant, but I listened to an online presentation by Mackenzie Work, my colleague at the New School, and Legacy Russell, who's a curator at the Studio Museum in Harlem, who recently published a book on glitch feminism. And that she's encouraging us to think of the glitch not as an error, but as a form of potential liberation, as a means of throwing shade, of refusing, of ghosting, of encrypting. So just hearing all of the various bodily glitches, technological glitches that we have encountered here this afternoon, or actually this evening, your time, this morning, my time, the cough, the cough itself as a glitch of the body. What are the semantic potentials of that? Again, not only in diagnosing an individual body, but scaling up to diagnose larger systemic issues of concern. What global systems can we hear through glitchy audio? And then I'm also going to close by just asking how can the glitch also be a productive form, but then how might it be exploited? The cough, if we take the cough, for example, as an index of wellness, it might reduce the subject to a fleshy box, essentially. So what happens if we do try to find kind of algorithmic means of diagnosis? If, for example, going back to Yeshi's talk about looking at various kind of her work in social justice in schools, I'm thinking about the increasing presence of things like aggression detection systems of school. What happens when affect itself is reduced to the glitch of a locker slamming or a high schooler screaming in a hallway? So the potential productive and I don't want to say good and bad, but the potentially exploitative applications of the glitch. While I'm also highlighting, as Legacy Russell does, its liberatory potentials, how the glitch could also be exploited too. So I hope that was minimally coherent. It's hard to do this on the fly, but thank you very much to all of you.
It was maximally coherent. It was unbelievable, unbelievably coherent. I can't even fathom how you did that. It's the end of 3 long but really nourishing days, and I can't think of a better way to end it actually than to invite the panelists here to kind of engage in some discussion. I mean, Shannon, I don't know if you had any questions that you wanted to lead off on, or if anybody had any immediate responses to Shannon's amazing provocations on the glitch or what have you. But yeah, I mean, this is an experiment too. I don't know how to conduct a conversation amongst whatever it is, eight people in a Zoom window at the end of a music festival, programming for a music festival. So, I don't necessarily want to begin anywhere particular. Did you, Shannon, or does anybody else?
I guess I'll just see if anybody has any responses to not only what I said, but since you haven't had a chance to have crosstalk to respond to one another's, if any resonances occurred to you.
And we can also mention that if someone wants to, put things in the Q&A as well, we'll keep an eye on those too.
Mm-hmm. I guess maybe I'll throw one out to maybe get us started, as I was also thinking at the end about the very situational and subjective nature of the glitch. So the cough for the cough is a sign of malfunction, but it also is precisely what a COVID app is listening for. The glitch is, so somebody's glitch is another person, well, somebody signals another person's noise is maybe another way to put this. So just wondering where the dysfunction, the breathlessness, the cough, the glitch to be experienced even in your audio connection, Vladan, the ping, where any one of these potential dysfunctions becomes semantically rich signal.
Yeah, I'm really happy that I became an example of a glitch. Starting to develop also some kind of paranoia of like, does anyone hear me now, or things like this. But in a way, I kind of, in what we do and how I feel. I feel like constantly of being a glitch in a society, and I think a lot of artists and a lot of like creative people have this feeling of like being a glitch, being an anomaly in some kind of perfect stream of spectacle, no? So we are all the time someone who are like jumping out of this kind of median situation and being a glitch, and then I'm at the same time feeling threatened by like our existence of glitches, like how, because like most of those technologies of like big data, AI, and all of them, they are not so favorable of glitches in a way. They tend to delete what's wrong, what's going out of what is glitch, you know. And then in that sense, I'm really happy to be example of the glitch in this like wonderful festival, and I really, it's amazing how I enjoyed these few hours that we are together. I think it was like really fantastic in lots of different dimensions, and thank you all for that.
Mm-hmm. I just also mentioned in regard to Thao's presentation, the fact that the ping is supposed to be this aberrant moment that interrupts our flow of movement, but the pings, when they become so incessant that they become kind of the soundtrack. So it's kind of the subtext actually becoming kind of the main text.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful, wonderful observation. I mean, I feel like I should have almost given like a trigger warning every time I did a ping. It was sort of, I think it was like, even for myself to sort of troll back through my own emails to collect some of those anecdotes was a lot. I mean, I really thank you for bringing up glitchy and glitch feminism as well. I think that was a direction I almost went down for this paper, particularly to think about the pandemic as a kind of glitch, in like a welcome interruption. The way Legacy Russell puts it, you know, there's sort of a much needed erratum on the pace of life and the pace with which everything was moving, because there was that beautiful moment for a time when we all paused, and actually it was completely fine to pause, and it was completely fine to not feel okay, and to know that you had solidarity in people who were also not feeling okay. And the glitch sort of revealed so much about what had to stop. But now it's gone more towards, because there's another glitch manifesto as well, right? By, I can't remember the first name, but Menkman, which is more from like 2008. Yeah, but and they talk about, you know, we can never design we can never design a glitch we can never domesticate the glitch. You know, the moment that you try and domesticate the glitch, you commodify the glitch, which is what we're starting to see now. We're in that part of the pandemic. We're seeing a lot more like AI, a lot more research on the pandemic. We're being asked to pandemify our researchers, I think is what James said. And people are sort of turning this glitch moment into productivity, where it's no longer a glitch.
Yeah, in that sense, like pandemic, it's a new AI. What was last year AI that everyone needed to, you know, AI-fy their things. Now it's like pandemic.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not outside of that also. Like the very virtue of participating in this thing, I've like started writing about the pandemic, and I've started doing research on the pandemic. It's just so impossible to escape when the glitch becomes so large. As you say, when the pings become so incessant, they are the soundtrack. When the glitches become so much, the pandemic becomes so much, you can't not be in it.
Sean, how do you think about the glitches in the data set that you sort of narrated so beautifully? Like, because I was just really struck by the kind of the care of like listening to something that is not, you know, the data set is, you know, is run through the ringer of these algorithms that are sort of listening in such a sort of narrow sense compared with the kind of listening that you conducted. There's something kind of amazing about the care that you took with that. And like, what was it like kind of running through it? And how did you sort of like conceptualize these kind of strange moments where you just find these kind of odd engagements? Like, what was that? Yeah, can you say something about that experience? It's just so striking, like that you've identified these moments where this person did this thing with a COVID voice diagnostic, and you know, it's kind of intimate. It's weird. I'd love to know what your experience of that was as a listener listening to the data set.
Yeah, well, you don't have to listen that far, actually. Listen that long before you start finding them. And I find that's the case kind of like always with data sets, is that, you know, like in order to train a neural network on a data set, like the first thing that programmers do is they like clean the data, right? So it's this process of like standardizing it, is getting rid of all the aberrations, and it takes a long time, and it's really like they complain about it, and that's because there's so much kind of like whatever standard data, and the same is the truth for the coughs is this data set had, you know, you listen to a few, and then all of a sudden you get people who weren't following the rules, and you realize like, well, people are alone. And they're like, they're being asked to use their voice to record something to the computer. Like, of course, they're going to, you know, like a large portion of people are going to use their voice in other ways than to train dutifully train the neural network. So I think, yeah, it's the programmer will listen to that and just be like, oh shit, another one, you know. how do we stop people from doing this? But I think it's kind of incumbent on us to listen to the data sets in their entirety, because like Shannon said, you know, a few minutes ago, like about one person's signal being another person's noise. You know, I think for a lot of us, like when we listen to this data set, you know, there's like, what are people saying when they're recording, you know, even sort of like incidental weird things into that website. That's what it was like. I just want to say thank you, Shannon. The way that you sort of like on the spot, you know, in the moment, like kind of summarized and brought together and, you know, identified all those themes. It was really really fantastic to watch. And also thank you to everyone's presentations. Like I would prefer to stop talking and just listen to all of you, because you have so much to say.
Mark or Andrew, do you have anything to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just picking up on the question to Sean and Sean's response. It was so interesting after hearing all those coughs and the work around breathing, and that it's narratives that emerge as glitches in the data set. And you know, when we talk about voice, you know, so often we're referencing narratives, but all of the monitoring, so many of the monitoring systems that we're talking about here are actually not interested in narrative at all. And in that sense, they replicate the logic that we're familiar with of, you know, data mining and data processing. Google doesn't care what your poem is. Google wants to see whether or not it can make a correlation between a phrase and you know, the likelihood that you're going to click on something. Right. This pushes in the register of what Trevor Paglin's talking about when he talks about operational media. That notion was quite poignant, listening to the voice coming on, somebody trying to talk to the machine, saying something about themselves. Here I am, you know, I'm trying to do this. It's the glitch that disappears. And it's interesting, all of these listening systems that we're talking about are actually not particularly interested in listening to anybody's story.
I just wanted to point out that Seth Kim Cohen wrote in the chat that kids are learning to imitate glitching in Zoom classrooms in order to avoid answering teachers' questions. And then also I put in the chat earlier, just to the panelists, that you probably know that President Trump is in Walter Reed Hospital right now with COVID. And there have been some edited videos of him speaking supposedly from Walter Reed, where there's a glitch in the video where it's clear that his coughs have been edited out to present this picture of health. So it's a glitch in the video that speaks volumes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll just very, very briefly jump in and say something. Firstly, just a massive thank you to everyone. Thanks to Shannon for that incredible synthesis and incredible roundup of some of the things that have come through, and to everyone for these really rich presentations. Lots to still process and think through for me. So excuse and also this is like long past my bednight. I have a small child, so it's like very much past my bedtime now, so please excuse the fog. But yeah, I mean, I wondered just a little bit about the the kind of the framing of this as a glitch. If the glitch is something that kind of corrects itself, a kind of small error that corrects itself, then yeah, maybe that, I mean, certainly that feels like something that we're being pushed towards, as you were saying, Thao, and as your piece like so wonderfully, all the pings there. So, really hitting hard for me this week with everything that's happening in the higher ed sector in Australia. This real compulsion to kind of continue as everything falls apart and continue as normal and to make the research through the pandemic. But I do think despite that, there's so much there that remains kind of impossible. Like there are so many instances where that does remain difficult to do, impossible to do. And then we can look at something like the riots that are going on at the moment, and it does feel like there is this kind of opening. This opening remains, like it hasn't yet normalized, or it hasn't yet fully auto-corrected itself. Even though that is very much, that feels like it's really, we're being pushed back to the kind of, to produce a new normal, and it's happening kind of as a daily thing. It does still feel like there is something, to kind of perhaps be overly optimistic. It does still feel like there's something there that isn't yet fully resolved, some kind of opening for the glitch to become a rupture, or the glitch to kind of continue to open in different ways, or to continue to produce further disruption. I'll stop there.
I can't help but think that these silences are like a feature of Zoom. Like when we've conducted interviews with people for this project, we often get into these moments where we can sort of see each other, and there's a certain number of people where the silence sort of, it's not clear yet how to interact. I don't know if that's a glitch or if I'm forcing it, but like, yeah, just having these silences, like after the silence that was curated by Andrew, yeah, I just can't help but feel that, like, yeah, Zoom silence is a thing, and I don't know what to make of that, but I'm just pointing it out because since it's there.
I mean, I wonder if anyone has any reflections on the experience of that collective silence in Zoom, because it was sort of so unusual and such a different kind of silence. I mean, it was more a soundtrack of sort of progressive unmuting. But then, of course, what we heard was something much more kind of fragmented and sort of partial than a silence. It was more kind of little moments of people's sonic worlds, perhaps, that breached a kind of audible threshold, and Zoom kind of opens the window for that sound to pass through into other people's rooms. And there was something sort of deeply textured and unusual about that. I guess I'm wondering, if anyone felt that there was any sort of, or what might be productive about, you know, experimenting collectively on a platform like this, and especially in that kind of way.
Yeah, just if you don't mind me jumping in. Oh, sorry, Thao, are you going to say something?
No, you go.
A few minutes into it, I again have like tears in my eyes. And I couldn't understand why. So I spent a little bit of time trying to figure it out. And it could be that it's at the tail end of these 3 days. I'm kind of tired. You know, it is like 1 a.m. here. But I think actually what I came to is that like, not so much about the sharing of some sonic space with other people, but actually like not having to talk, not having to do something. Like I'm on Zoom every day, and the silence has to be filled, and I've got to be on time, and there's all this compulsion to perform, and it just like felt like such a relief or something, you know, like not to have to talk. That's it. I think I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe that's not why. Maybe it was something else. But that's kind of like one conclusion that I had for like why I felt that way like a few minutes into that.
Also say that it felt very sorry, you go.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I totally agree with that. And actually, just to bring it back to your cough piece at the very beginning, Sean, that last, you know, the ending with that silence, it sounded more like the cough piece. It wasn't a chorus. The infrastructure of Zoom doesn't allow us to make a chorus. It only allows for these small individuated noises, much like the samples of coughs that we had. So it became this super interesting sort of bookend to the session, to have yours at the beginning and the coughs, you know, our own coughs kind of submitted at the end. But I wondered what resonances that might have for, you know, Andrew's provocations around attuning together, if we have an infrastructure that literally won't let us do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, right? And that's the challenge of being on Zoom. It's like we're just it's an infrastructure that doesn't allow for that. But I do think I think it's also an invitation to, like, you know, to keep thinking about how we can play with the platform, listen to the platform, listen for its like the, if infrastructure is one of those things that, you know, we don't tend to notice until it breaks down. And, you know, that's like what Balcon Star's like famous formulation of it or something. But then, like, you know, how do we start to try to really listen to when it breaks down, listen to how it inhibits our being, listen for the way it kind of invisibilizes those moments of capture and naturalizes those kinds of moments of capture as well. I think that's part of the challenge of, you know, it's such a heavily corporatized and commodified space, and it's part of that thing of pushing us back to kind of return to and find some new normal. Like suddenly we're like, oh yeah, let's continue to do this like international music festival, like, but we can just do it on Zoom. It's like, that seems bent, like, you know, it's like, what? I don't know. So yeah, like I don't know, there's something about, you know, I'm trying to, you know, like you, Sean, I'm also like I'm like teaching every day and in meetings on Zoom every day, and you get that like total Zoom fatigue and the like novelty of like having a drink with friends like across the world is like thoroughly worn off. Like that happened in the beginning of the pandemic. It's like, oh yeah, like cool, let's have a drink with my friends in San Fran. That I could always do this, but I never do. And you know, now we're at the like get me off this screen, like and get me off this. But I think that's the kind of, this is also the moment where we might want to push ourselves to like, you know, think what like Vladan's diagrams of extraction do and capture do in a platform like this, when we're sort of re-entering it at that moment of fatigue and at that moment of like, well, I have to use it to teach, and I've stopped thinking about what it does, and I'm starting to like pick up on it. Well, it works pretty well, and teaching happens this way, and socializing happens that way, and now music festival happens in a third way. And I think like the invitation remains to kind of keep thinking how we try to hear what the infrastructure is invisibilizing, perhaps. And those like, yeah, I don't know what those experiments are, but
I'll just also point out that just because I have a background in chemistry, I was thinking of Zoom as more like a mixture rather than a solution. It's like a mosaic rather than a melding. It provides a very different form of collectivity. And I know Stephanie Strickland has been posting some things in the chat about that too. And also I just posted something. I just saw this 2 days ago. There's a new competition, I guess you could call it that, hosted by Creative Informatics. And it's encouraging people to think about how to use Zoom as a creative medium, how to reflect on its kind of affordances and limitations to see how it can create new forms of collectivity, new modes of performance. So that might be of interest given the nature of our discussion here to some of you.
Yeah, that act of sharing in the chat windows has been an interesting feature for me of this. Like, because I hear you, Andrew, so much about Zoom fatigue and resisting it, but I also, as a curator involved in the production of this, I'm just so conscious that there's something that was valuable about doing this, online. This particular collection of individuals across the last few days, and the specific way in which, like, we moved in and out of performance and sort of screenings and so on. Yeah, I mean, it's not to say oh, there's good and there's bad, but I'm just really struck by how how much of value there was to be found over the last few days. And I was surprised, honestly. I've been surprised. I mean, how like, I was euphoric last night after DeForest Brown Jr.'s performance. It was absolutely amazing. I did not think I could experience that through Zoom. And there's been a number of moments like that are moving or, intellectually challenging or something in just ways that I didn't expect. So, it's not, there's not really a counterpoint. It's just to note my surprise. Also note that it's we've been going for more than 3 hours, and it may well be time to wrap up. I mean, I think I want to acknowledge Yeshi again, who gave, speaking of like powerful performances. I mean, how amazing was that? And it's a shame that she couldn't stay with us, but I mean, we were lucky to have had her. So I want to acknowledge Yeshi, and we have some other thank yous to say, I think, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of tempting to try to sum up the last few days, but I mean, I think it's probably best not to, and in some ways, as you say, thank everyone who's made it possible. All of the people who are on screen right now who contributed tonight so brilliantly, but also all of the contributors across all 3 nights, and the teams at Unsound and Liquid Architecture, Matt and Gosha, Mikhail Popes, and Lauren Squire, who I'd love if you would turn your camera on and say hello and just wave out there too, if you don't have to, but who has been running these 3 sessions over the last 3 days so beautifully, and made Zoom a kind of performance platform for all of us. This has been the launch of the machine listening curriculum, so it's just the launch, and I think the question is where we might take it from here. And, you know, I think we'll take a little bit of time to think about that and think about all of these contributions, continue to develop the resource.
And to continue doing it around different institutional contexts as well. I think that's been one of the things that, you know, the Unsound context has been really, really amazing for bringing different people in. We're really grateful to Unsound, but, you know, to proliferate those contexts, I think, and I think that'll be the challenge, to like keep growing it around different contexts and to divest ownership continuously as well. That's been a real lesson, like for me, the collaborative production of the resource and the, you know, and these sessions has been really meaningful. So anyway, I don't want to tear up like Sean. Well, maybe I do.
Do it.
So we going to end things in a kind of weird way, like another kind of experiment, which is we're going to put on some music by Jasmine Guffond, who's an artist that we really love, a musician who's been doing a lot of work kind of at the intersection of data politics, electronic music, machine listening, and she's got a recent album called Microphone Permissions on Migo Records, and it's a really amazing work. So we're going to put that on, but we're going to sort of put it on kind of quietly at a sort of moderate volume, and then you know, if people want to keep chatting, it's kind of like a chill out room where you can chat over some very abstract and beautiful music. And I might go through and see who's still in the attendees section and bring you into the panelists view too, if anyone wants to sort of come in and say hello. Guests as well, you guys have done so much work, so feel free to you know, sign off and say goodbye at any time too. But once again, to thank everyone for this collective experiment, which has been so rewarding and so enjoyable.
Seems like a good place to maybe put the mics back on. If anybody wants to. Don't know if we're still streaming. Oh dear.
Should we do it? Should we try a version of I am sitting in a Zoom?
I think we should. Are there any of the panelists still here? I think we should release people who don't feel like joking around in in a Zoom window. Might pull the plug on my stream. I can't handle the tension.